been above freezing. Yeah, so we were complaining, you know, it's coming back cold here.
It's the same thing. You have good.
Shorts and a t-shirt. It's like spring weather.
I don't know why it's not.
Oh no, this is like March for April, maybe even May. So you can stick out the summers. The right time of year.
Oh yeah, he's like, they give me like.
That's my idea. I've been out here so long. No, I actually we were in Ames, so closer to Iowa State.
A buddy of mine I played ball with was defensive halfback for Iowa State.
Oh, okay. Most of my family went to University of Iowa, so every time the two meet, you know, it's Facebook lights up and trash talking begins. Oh, that's fun.
Oh yeah. Iowa State more technical school, engineering, agricultural,
I know. I'm gonna get a grad
school, those kinds of things.
Yeah, especially agricultural. Yeah, that's a lot of majors. They have a business school there too, but University of Iowa has a lot more diverse programs.
They also tend to employ fairly few people, which is how they can sort of get away with that.
Where were you?
Just a larger campus.
I started out in college in computer science.
Nice community.
Didn't finish, but I
The
started.
only thing I miss from Iowa though is the Four Seasons. Right? It's like here you get like the only one.
But our teachers were always telling us, you know, sometimes we always get confused. Like, are they telling us that 'cause they want more money from you? Because they're like, you gotta finish your degree. And then one time one of my student teachers told us that he was in his classes she needed 2 years. And she ended up getting a job.
Washington's nice. I haven't traveled through there. I've been to Portland.
It was just like ridiculous.
Well, depends on the answer of when. In '99, that's not impossible.
I've had.
After about 2000, late 2000, yeah, that's not happening.
I know. I just.
Yeah, that was stressful.
No, it's. I might just say.
If you get a full degree.
Well, you send the pictures? So I'll take that as an no. Yeah, I didn't send any pictures. Apparently not that many people actually did.
Good. How are you?
She sent something out like mid-late December saying, hey, you can send me 3 pictures of something that you consider as basically good land user.
Man, yeah. I remember getting that, but that was like,
It was the 21st of December.
yeah, now I remember. I remember getting that. Best thing about agreement.
You're not alone. I think a number of people forgot or just didn't do it. Have you determined what you're going to champion? Oh, rather than the picture links or whatever? Yeah. She's going to check.
And then I saw your gate. So that's what she's talking about. That's the gate.
But the gay is main gay.
Is that where they do it? Is that where they have to open Yeah, we went with.
I'm not sure how much Arizona should encourage grass usage.
They would. These have.
It's not really like kept
My son-in-law said that means my.
I mean, ideally, we shouldn't be encouraging anything that requires independent watering.
I see.
That's one of the things that when I was down at U of A, I had an environmental society class. They told us just Tucson golf courses alone accounted for more than 4 of the city's water.
Is
Because anything that requires nice green is just going to eat water in Arizona, especially if they don't install an irrigated drip system.
All right, I call the meeting of the Goodyear 2025 plan to order. Will you all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag Okay, so I've got a list of names that had notified us about absences. Obviously, we have Chuck, who's out today. Actually, his I think his daughter or some family members in labor, so he's in the hospital. Jeff Classy, Eduardo Borquez, Steve Kirk, and Todd Tupper. And so I'll ask for a motion to excuse the absences. I'll make the motion. Second?
Second.
All right, Ted, and I can't read the names, but down the end. Tony. Okay, so next up is approval of minutes. Are there any comments on the minutes from our last meeting, December 11th? No? Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes from the December 11th meeting?
So moved.
A second?
I'll second.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, do we have a copy of them? Or were we supposed to have a copy of them?
You don't.
Is that our homework?
You don't have a copy in your packet, but there was a copy emailed to you. I'm sorry, I didn't print a copy.
Okay, so on to public comments. So it's an open call to the public to give an opportunity for the public to address the Goodyear 2025 Plan Committee on any item listed on today's agenda or a subject that is not on the agenda. Public comments always encouraged. Please complete a speaker card that were listed by the held at the door. Listen to the subject you would like to discuss. Unless otherwise permitted by the chair, each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Before you begin to speak, please identify yourself by clearly stating for the record your name and address. Do you have any cards?
I don't have any. Oh,
My name is David.
you can go up to the front at that. Sorry. Make you go.
Make it as intimidating. Thank you. Yes, it's on. Hello, my name's David Dubay, and I am a resident of Phoenix, but I'm an employee of the Maricopa County Department of Public Health, and I'm here with a colleague in the back, Shirley Stremble, and I've worked quite a bit with Deb Robinson in the past. And the Maricopa County Department of Public Health is really pleased to provide any assistance that we can. We have a real invested interest in healthy community design, and we are in fact learning that in some cases the best health program is a transportation bill or an education program or a affordable housing program. And there's this whole approach now towards health in all policies, consideration of the health impacts that policy decisions have. We have multiple partners, and we're working with actually other cities, 5 other cities in Maricopa County on their general plans right now. There's an awful lot of resources available. There's an awful lot of research available to inform you as you're making your decisions on what's best for Goodyear. And I'm very pleased and happy to offer our support. Vincent Lopez, who's also on our staff,
is a native of Goodyear, still has family in Goodyear, and he will be attending these meetings on behalf of the Maricopa County Department of Public Health. Thank you so much for your interest. We applaud the work you're doing. We look forward to the plans that you develop that really propel Goodyear forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? Any other public comment? Okay, so it's like we are going to move it next into the existing conditions report and a presentation from Katie and Leslie.
Okay. You can see you don't have a copy of the existing conditions report in front of you. However, it's completed. Here's a sample copy. And I just want to thank Ross and Aaron, our interns, and Ross especially has been working on it since we started. Worked really, really hard. ASU started this for us, but there was a lot of cleanup we had to do, partly because they have given it to us in this format of a program we don't have in the city, so it had to be but it's a great document, and you can see it's pretty thick. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to put it up on our website, and if you are willing, we really appreciate it if you're willing to use the electronic copy version of it. If any of you just don't have internet access at home, need a hard copy, shoot me an email or give me a call, and we'll get you a hard copy. But we appreciate for those of you who don't mind using the electronic copy, go ahead and use that. But I have one copy here. If any of you after the meeting want to flip through it to make a decision if you are willing to look at the electronic copy or not. It's all 8.5 by 11, so it's pretty easy to see on the computer screen. However, since we don't have that for you, I did get a map for everyone. So everyone here has a map. So this is just for your reference. And it just has a little bit of information about the city. And just a thought here is, you realize that many of you don't know a lot of information about the entire city. And we start talking about places and referencing things. So this is to give you that reference point. It has, you can see the color. Those are all developments in the city that have kind of been approved. They either have zoning. I think actually they do all have at least preliminary zoning, so we know they're out there. Where you can look at the street patterns, and those areas that have street patterns are the areas that are developed or developing. Just by looking at this, you can kind of see how much of the city has been planned and how much of the city has been developed and how much left there is. And some of these large areas of pink, like Estrella and this one called Madeira and this one, they're tagged as residential, but there are a lot of industrial and commercial areas planned within those. We just haven't shown those because they're at really preliminary planning. We're up here because it's existing development. We have development, so kind of doing that work there to sit out but we've also put, this area south in the south of Estrella, we call that Rainbow Valley, so we put the label on there. Because so some of you may not know what we're talking about when we start talking about Rainbow Valley. And this is the area we call Simone Valley, and there's a little community art here that's called Mobile. So the map just has a lot of that information on there for you. So I hope it's helpful. If there's information you're wondering about you don't see on the map, let me know, and maybe we'll come up with version 2.0 sometime, put it on the website. But yeah, that's just for your reference. Oh, and then part of that in your packet, I gave you all a little piece, and it should be at the end of the packet to planning for this concept. And again, just for your reference, these are some of the terms we've been throwing around or we're about to throw around. So it's just to kind of help you out. So if you're wondering, but that's really asking the question of what that means. It's right there for you. And again, if you start hearing other concepts that we're throwing around and you don't know what it is, likely someone else doesn't know what it is either. So please just ask or shoot me an email after the meeting and let me know that that's something we need to add to our planning concepts list. We'll keep updating you so we
All right, so that moves us on to next item, which is land use plan.
Yeah. Katie, can I ask a question? Yeah. Now, for the Idea Champions, do you want us to just send you ideas as we go along, or did you want us to wait to do that presentation to the committee? I'm not quite sure how you want us to do that. The thought was, you know, we have that outline, that kind of, and I was trying to make sure that the ideas you want to champion fit somewhere in the outline. They kind of fit with one of the chapters we're going to discuss. So that, I just wanted the broad topic. If you want to tell me more about it, because you want to discuss it with me first, that's fine. But if you just want to tell me, you know, that, you know, I want to talk about streets, but you're not going to tell me what you're going to say about streets. That's fine too, you know, but, I'm going with you, and maybe I'll go ahead and, on my list of idea champions, I'll go ahead and write the dates on there, so that we're all on the same page of the dates, so that's good.
Thank you.
Make that note now before I forget. First, can everyone see a screen, because you kind of have this in a way, or can you move this, so that you can see your,
It didn't rip.
Okay, so we're going to continue the discussion we had last week. So last week we talked to you about, last month. So last month we talked about creating this new concept for land use plan. But, before, you know, staff goes pen and ink on paper and starts drawing out land use plan concepts, there's certain things we want to talk to you about. Now, there's certain concepts and ideas that are kind of, it's not that they're not up for discussion, it's just that, you know, in areas where there's a lot of existing development already, we don't need as much discussion, but, there's certain areas where we know there's lots of discussion that you guys are gonna want, that we've already been hearing, and so that's gonna be the focus of tonight's meeting. So our goal tonight is to talk about these major influences on the land use plan and get your ideas and thoughts. And our thought is that's gonna give staff the information we need so that we can go back, create a draft land use map, and then we'll be able to bring that, and then you'll actually have something in front of you. And I think once you have a draft map in front of you, it'll also be easier to make comments on some of those more detailed areas. But right now, we're gonna just focus on certain, large influences. And kind of as I have up here, just looking forward, I hope to have a draft plan to give you in your hand at our February meeting, kind of your homework to review. And then that March meeting is, we have it slated to actually discuss. And we have those, open house meetings for the end of February, so that'll give us a chance to take it out to the public too. And so when we come to you in March, we'll have hopefully the public comments on it. You'll have had a chance to look through it, and then we can have a good discussion, detailed discussion on the land use plan. So, you know, I emailed these out to you, but, staff identified some major things we think are gonna influence the land use plan over the next 10 years. And, there's a variety of reasons. Mostly, these are things we've heard at the visioning workshop and at Gaines. But they are light rail and transit, and then the surrounding development around there. Transit, mostly bus on major streets. Development near our natural resources. High-density residential development, especially how it interacts with, existing single-family residential. Employment corridors and centers, how our unplanned master plan communities, will develop, and then development around the airport. Now, the other thing that we have going on is that, ARS, Arizona Revised Statute, which is basically state law, gives us specific requirements for our land use plan. This is right out of your tab 6, the state statutes that are in there. It tells us that for a land use plan, we have to have these things. We have to have standards for population density. We have to have standards for building intensity. We have to have specific programs and policies for infill. We need to Oh, okay. So that chart we had, we're gonna be working from, basically we created a matrix. Because what we're gonna do tonight is we're gonna look at each of those major influences, light rail, transit, high density residential, commercial development, et cetera, and look at those from each aspect that we're required to by state law. Look at, what is building intensity or building height, in other words, or what does residential density look like in terms of light rail development? What does all those things look like in terms of developing high-density residential? And I know you're not exactly creating land use categories, but again, I think by having this discussion, we're going to come up with, there's some areas where this is appropriate, there's some areas where this other thing is appropriate. It's really going to give staff those detailed areas to go from to be able to create this land use map. And of course, the land use map is going to include some of these policies we talked about, commercial is appropriate on arterial streets, et cetera, like we talked about last month. And, we might not have just like one idea for each square. We might have a couple different ideas for each square. Some squares, maybe we don't really have anything, maybe infill development with our master plan communities, right? There's not much to talk about there. But that's pretty much the plan. You want to add anything?
I guess we're kind of just sort of making sense to people what we're trying to do. And you can say no, because I'm looking at a lot of people kind of looking at me like we're from Mars. So just to take a step back, looking at a land use map is huge. And if you remember last meeting, what we talked about was instead of worrying about, we made a decision that instead of worrying about finding where every little commercial corridor was going to be in Goodyear, instead we were going to create a land use map that talked about the kinds of places that we wanted in our community. And so when we sat down, we kind of tried to figure out, okay, how do we develop these places with you as a group? We talked around it a lot, and we realized there are things that drive land use. There are drivers of land use. There are things like transit, airports, your natural resources. You can't build an apartment complex in the middle of a river, for example. Respond to these drivers differently. Development happens differently along a river than it might happen along a freeway. And so those drivers end up creating the kinds of places that are going to be in Goodyear. And so to kind of spur this discussion, we created this matrix of drivers and then, the drive the places, like what are places like along light rail and transit? And let's describe them in terms of what the law requires of us, height, density, diversity, and infill. And so what we're going to do tonight, and I'm going to kind of jump ahead, but I think it sort of puts it in the bigger picture context, is if you remember, we sent you an email, Katie sent you the email, I shouldn't do we, she does all the work. Katie sent you an email saying, what are places that you think are cool that respond to these drivers? And many of you sent us pictures. And so what we want to do tonight is share what's cool about those places. And then you have in front of you file cards. You can write down what you think is cool for Goodyear to have in those places in its land use plan. And so when we create this map, we'll now have these places that respond to light rail and transit. And when Katie begins to develop the rules for these places, she'll use all the ideas that you've given her tonight. Does that make sense now? So what we're going to do tonight a little bit is, before we kind of hit this hard, we're going to go through some thinking about these places, your ideas that you sent. We're going to give each of you a chance to talk about some of the ideas that you sent to us. And then we're going to kind of end that and ask you to start filling out your cards. And we're going to bring that piece of paper back, and I'm going to start just sticking them on that piece of paper, and we're going to fill in that matrix. So by the end of the night, we're going to have a whole list of, for example, the kinds of places that respond to light rail and transit in terms of the kinds of building density and height we want, the kinds of residential densities we want, the kinds of diversity we want next to those places. We want commercial, residential, industrial. Maybe it's just commercial and industrial. Maybe it's everything. What kind of infill happens along those places? And as you talk about that, that'll create the kinds of places that you'll have in Goodyear that respond. So, for example, if we look at developing your natural resources, think about near the Estrellas or near the, what are the Sonoran Desert National Monument. How do we want development to respond to those really important resources within our community? Talk about it in terms of those four things. So does that begin to make sense? So now when Katie looks at the map, she'll say, okay, how do I deal with the places next to the Sonoran National Monument? Well, this is the kind of places we want near that resource. This is the kind of places we want near light rail. These are the kinds of places we want near our employment corridor. Does that make a little more sense? So that's sort of where we're going tonight. With that, are there questions?
Can I ask a question? So I'm looking at this chart, and everything on the left-hand column is basically all the future. Obviously, it's the future land use, things that Goodyear doesn't necessarily have now. So we're kind of under the assumption that, say, single-family residential neighborhoods that make up a big part of Goodyear today, that's already planned for in the 2003 plan, so we don't have to address it as part of this exercise?
What's here is here. And I don't believe that we have a couple things that constrain us. One is, no one, unless you're really mean to either one of us, wants to go in and take away your house and turn it into a parking lot. But if you're really mean, we mind. But, what exists. And truthfully, your stock is generally fairly new.
Yeah.
It's not like we're looking at 100-year-old stock or 50-year-old stock. We're really looking at probably overall 20-year-old and less stock. So that is in place development, and that is planned for. So we're not going to take that away.
We're not reinventing the wheel.
I
Okay.
would say, however, that, for example, we do have master plan communities. That talks to the types of new master plan communities we have. But there are vacant areas in existing master plan communities. While we can't change those entitlements, the rights that those people already have, we can talk about what we'd like to see in the future. And if, in fact, someone chose to come in and change their zoning or change their rights, they would then have to abide by the rules of the new plan. If they were, in fact, going to change their zoning in a way that would create an amendment, if that makes any sense. So if they were going to come in and want a massive change, let's say an area had an area plan for housing and they now want to turn it into an industrial park, that change may trigger a plan amendment. And then they'd have to go by the rules of the new plan. So it does, in that respect, talk a little bit to the development that's in place.
All right, that's helpful.
Chairman? It was just a suggestion. There may be things that do not fit within your categories there. I would just suggest put an other, and then we can elaborate on that, because I can see where we may enter into discussions on
You need the categories across the top or down the side.
both.
What I would suggest to you, to sort of be a little tough, this is sort of why they hired me, is to be the kind of tough one, is I want to stick with the four categories across the top,
Okay.
because frankly, that's really what we're required to do to describe land use. And we should be able to address it. If we begin to go outside of that, what we'll find is we're probably wandering into another general plan. And so that's why I wanted to kind of, like, if we start talking about bike roads, bike paths, for example, and pedestrian pathways, that actually we're wandering already into a circulation element. So I want to be kind of tough on that. In terms of the important things that land use is going to have to respond to in the future, which is the list on the left-hand side, I think your comment is well taken, and we should probably ask people if there are other big land use influences that you believe we've missed that development will need to respond to. And if there's a couple more, we can add those two categories on the
Okay.
bottom. Because I think you're right on that one, so I apologize for that. That makes sense to folks? We don't really know whatever else development may have to respond to.
Let's hear it.
Okay.
Head on.
One thing that might help, Leslie, is we certainly know what building height means, but could you talk a little bit about intensity, density, diversity, and infill, so we are all on the same page with the same clarity of understanding of what those parameters mean?
Great suggestion, thank you.
Okay, so, and jump in.
No, no one should.
Building intensity is
I think we're talking about housing diversity, but I don't want us to not think about diversity also in terms of mixed use. And there's two kinds of mixed use, so that you know. There's mixed use that happens in one building, like, I don't know if you know about the building in downtown Phoenix where the bottom part's a garage, then you have a hotel, and then you have an office building, it's like a layer cake. That's what they call vertical mixed use. And then the other kind of mixed use would be a lot where you have, one, however many acre lot, part of the lot is housing, part of the lot is commercial. But each of those uses are in their own separate building or in their separate horizontal attachment to the building. And those two different types of diversity are also important in, they have kind of relationship to the intensity, and they also have a relationship to the density. Because, for example, you could have a stacked building that only had 200 houses in it, but it was a 30-acre site, so if you say 30 by 200 is what, give or take, 5 houses to the acre, give or take, I'm not really great on that, slide 7. That's not really a very dense apartment complex at all, right? So it's all kind of related. And it's important to think about because when a development occurs, these are all the pieces of the puzzle that they work with. And so, we want to think about that as well.
And then info development refers to, as we develop, it's not like every lot goes lot, develop. You can look around your neighborhoods probably, and, especially residential often develops first, and then the commercial will develop on the corners or on the outside. So infill development refers to that development of those parcels that haven't been developed yet. And that can be really important because, sometimes if a development is developing all by itself, in a vacant area, we're okay with it, but if it's developing next to our house, we're not okay with it, or we have some, different ideas for that when it's going to be next to us. So I think that's especially why the state requirement to look at infill development is in there to take into consideration, are there special considerations in the development based on an infill parcel rather than if it's a master plan community kind of developing an area from scratch. There might be different considerations. And does that help?
Yep.
Other questions? The first, light rail and transit. And this was added because at the GAIN event and the visioning workshop, over and over and over and over, we heard, we want light rail, we want light rail, we want light rail. So we thought we really need to discuss this. I thought you guys might be interested. I just got this off the Valley Metro website. These are kind of the current plans for the extension of the light rail. And you can see that dot going out to the Southwest Valley 2023, and it's not even reaching us yet. It's not even reaching the 101 yet. So you can see it's not even going out to the Northeast Valley till 2032. So it's going to be a while before it gets to the Southwest Valley. And so I just wanted us all to be aware of it, that the timing might be out there a little bit, but things change. I also want to make the point, just so everyone, I don't know if everyone's had a chance to go downtown and see the light rail. Light rail is not commuter rail. And you can't see this exactly, but there's also plans for commuter rail. Commuter rail, kind of like Amtrak. Everyone know Amtrak? The Union Pacific Railroad tracks along MC-85, already regional planners are looking at, hey, maybe that's a potential for commuter rail. Commuter rails probably have to stop at Goodyear. I used to live in the Chicago area. I think Amtrak has 3 stops in the entire Chicago area, and it's a major city. So likely, if we had commuter rail, there wouldn't be a stop in Goodyear, but it'd be this great asset to possibly get to Las Vegas or LA really easily on rail. But just to be clear, light rail gets us around Phoenix area, or maybe to a commuter rail stop, so then we can head out. So these are the current plans. And one thing I want to, these are my pictures to point out, but one thing I want to be clear is you can see that dot, and I can't even remember if the corridor's down I-10, But you can kind of see it's following I-10 right now as it's coming to the maybe there are some amazing ways to get there, and I don't know about them, but it's just something to think about. You know, the city of Avondale, they just adopted their general plan, and they did show it going down Van Buren. Their future city center is at Van Buren and Avondale Boulevard, so they wanted to go down their city center. So there is a possibility that the Southwest Valley cities could get together and get some momentum and force it down Van Buren Street if that's what we wanted, but that would take a lot of effort because it's probably going to be more expensive. That's not necessarily our decision tonight to decide where the light rail corridor is going, but I just want us to be a little cognizant of it, so as we talk about transportation, talk about things in the future, that light rail could look very different out here, it could look similar. It just depends how we move forward with it. Here's one of the pictures I got, and this is from Steve Kirk, and he's not here tonight, he's sick. And so I would ask him kind of why he chose this picture. This is Santa Fe, New Mexico. But he tells me this is a transit, this is right by a transit stop. We can't see the transit, but that this is transit-oriented development. Since he's not here, I'll say my thoughts that I would never guess this is a transit stop. It looks like a lot of fun. I would totally go here. I think it's a nice place to be. And that's the only picture I got. Do we want to discuss it?
We have a choice of which comments, I'm afraid we pulled this thing out, I can't see that. So, just so that you know, you'll see that all of you have cards up in front of you.
And I have more cards.
I think what I'm gonna do, let's have the chart right here.
Okay.
Okay?
Sorry, we're changing our minds on the fly here.
I'm just trying to, yeah, think of it.
But go ahead, feel free.
So, thoughts about the kind of, how you think development, transit-oriented development should be in terms of density, intensity. You could stick them on those cards. And the reason I didn't give each of you a ton of cards is I was hoping that you would be sort of concise with your thinking. You know, and so if you see your thought up there already, we don't need to repeat it. Just because we're somewhat limited space. I'm trying to do our So, you guys over here are sort of a little bit of a twisted neck.
One thing I meant to mention in my introduction too was that right now there's this regional study going on called the Sustainable Transportation Land Use Study. And again, it's the regional planners are kind of looking at how land use and these light rail corridors go together. And my understanding is once this study is complete, which it is already ready, it's almost kind of like a guidebook to how to get a light rail corridor. Because it starts to talk about, you know, light rail corridors are going to go where the most used bus routes are. At least that's kind of what we're doing right now, because that tells us that's where people need them. And of course, it's expensive, so we're going to put, you know, invest first where the most people are and most people need them. But it's also, you know, and it is the chicken or the egg, but it's also going to talk about, you know, makes me think about, do we create a place where we want light rail to be first, that is, you know, thinking about what we need to create, you know, if we want to create a light rail corridor, maybe we want to create first a successful bus route corridor, what does that look like? And then that'll lead us to the second step of light rail. But of course, I know it's chicken or the egg, because sometimes we need that light rail to put those things there that make it successful.
So the reality is you're not going to get light rail though unless this stuff is there. So, okay, in this plan, at one point, we're going to decide where we want to see places that we think light rail and transit corridors should be. But right now, what we want to talk about is what kind of development do we want along those corridors? What do we want places along transit corridors to look like? So, what I would ask you to think about, there was only one picture, but when you think of a transit corridor, if it's a bus rapid transit corridor, a light rail corridor, or even a heavy rail corridor, and it's going to be in Goodyear, just tell me, what do you see? What kind of a place do you see? Anyway, think about it. You see someplace like downtown Phoenix? Do you see a place that looks just like the rest of Goodyear? Do you see a place where buildings are built close to the street? Are the buildings taller than they normally are here now? What do you envision? You're gonna think your kid is gonna now say, Mom, I'm gonna take the bus to school. And the school's in Phoenix. He's gonna get on a transit corridor. What kind of place is that gonna be? What's gonna be along it? What does it serve?
You want us to say or write it down?
Well, you can do both, but I'm trying to just get, I think
Yeah.
say it now and then write it down so we can all just begin to get our minds cooking.
I think for a light, like I'm thinking light rail, and just general kind of mass transit. Typically, to me, this things that would be around it would be more of a higher density of buildings. Just because I think more commercial stuff. Typically, you're going to points of interest, whether it be, you know, like the football stadium with all the Westgate stuff around it, or downtown where you've got a lot of businesses, so you're going to have a lot of skyscrapers and whatnot. I think of more of a high density, high intensity, typically more commercial than residential.
Usually going there for your job or entertainment.
Okay, this is perfect. Okay, so this is what I'm gonna do. You said taller buildings, so I'm gonna stick that right over here. There's that taller buildings idea. Okay, the kinds of diversity, things like that. Stadiums, businesses, and you said more commercial than residential, right? Okay.
I think it should be mixed too, though. I mean, you should also have. I like the idea of a park or something along the way as well.
Okay, park.
Parks and
Mixed use
mixed use. Yeah, I mean,
Mixed-use development.
there could be some residential along the way too.
Professional buildings, doctors, dentists. I think recreation in general, like if we're going to develop the Bullard Wash, you want people to be able to take their bike on the light rail or on a bus to the Bullard Wash instead of having to necessarily drive
So
there.
either the resource or the connection.
Right. We don't necessarily want a huge parking lot next to a beautiful natural resource.
Okay, what other kinds of things? What about density in terms of a transit corridor? Let's talk about that a little bit.
High density.
Okay, what does someone mean? Let's talk about high, when you say high, I'm from New York.
Yeah, that kind of high density.
High density to me is probably going to be a little bit different than high density might be to someone else. So let's talk about, first of all, maybe, do we see buildings built onto the street, or do we envision these buildings that have more parking around?
More parking.
We want buildings with more parking.
Yeah, I don't picture parking near it because if you're taking mass transit, then you don't have a car to park anywhere. That's what you're riding there. So I don't see parking so much as just I'm thinking buildings kind of right up there against it.
But
But if you don't have, if the light rail isn't accessible to you and you have to park, you have to drive to get there, you have to have a place to park. You know,
Well, but
you
that
have
would
to
be
have
at the
both.
station.
Right.
So maybe places to park at the station,
Yeah.
but maybe stores, so we need places to park at stations.
Right.
Parking behind. Thinking about the station.
But what about stores and things like that? So are we thinking like, you know, there'd be, let's call it what it is, a park and ride,
Right.
but what about like stores and stuff that are maybe, you know, 400 feet from the station, a legitimate walk? What about those kinds of
Well,
places?
most people, when they're going to take a right rail, what they want to do is they want to get there, get a cup of coffee and a donut before they get on the thing. And then when they get off, maybe stop for some sort of a snack or a drink or something before.
Going somewhere specific, whether it's a restaurant, or to an event, or to shop.
Or to physicians.
So, okay, because this is the dilemma of light rail. You guys are right on it, okay? Let's say you're in Goodyear, let's say you're in Phoenix, and you take the light rail to Goodyear, right? So now you don't have access to a park. So we've kind of talked about all this kind of stuff needs to be around light rail,
So does residential.
right?
You have to accommodate people that may choose not to have a vehicle, that can't go to the park and ride, that need to use the bus or the light rail as their only means of getting to and from work or wherever they want to go. So there has to be doesn't have to be right on the rail line, but close proximity.
So residential and walking distance.
But yeah, I would also add that it should be right along the rail line. In fact, at the stations, because people are going to take transit are going to want to live near transit. And the other thing too is, I don't know how we address this in this row, but regional destinations. If we're going to connect light rail, maybe it's educational institutions. We talked about recreation, things that people from outside of Goodyear will want to come to.
It should tie into other transit as well, buses or things should be there, biking paths and things like that. They can get to that location, and then if they need to go somewhere else, they can have some other mode of transportation.
I just want to piggyback on what Gerald mentioned about people stopping for something to eat. Also, people might want to stop and have some healthy food options. You know, where there's mobile vending there with locally grown produce, especially in the Goodyear area, we have a lot of produce because of our agriculture. And some people might not have access to the supermarket, so places where people can get healthier food choices.
These are kind of cool places that we're talking about. I like it.
I think you also need open spaces, just in case, like if for whatever reason the light rail or the bus is late, or you're a kid, and your mom is meeting you there, your dad's meeting, and somebody has to wait for you at a station, or you don't want to be necessarily surrounded by concrete. You might want to have the option of sitting at a park bench.
Maybe having some type of garden there, something that
So
looks
could
nice.
we call that like public plazas?
Yeah.
Slash.
People friendly.
Yeah.
And aesthetically pleasing, whether there's some type of garden there or artwork.
So we're still back to the density. Let me try and unwind this one another way. We think that single-family houses should be along these light rail corridors. A third of the residential should be there. So let's kind of go a little bit.
No, right against. Well, when we're talking about all this, I mean, are we talking in general? I mean, you say the corridor, so then to me that means like you're talking the whole entire line. But then a lot of stuff we've talked about typically comes down to more where, like, does the bus stop? Where does the train stop to let people off? Because if you're talking about along the line, I mean, you don't want people, when a train's going full speed, you don't want people living right next to that. It's not going to be, like, super loud, but it's not going to be very quiet either. But if you're talking about where people get off, in my experience, I mean, I always go back to D.C. D.C. had an amazing train system there. If you lived out in a suburb, kind of like what Goodyear is to Phoenix, you drove to a parking spot, whether it was a garage or a parking lot. You parked, you got on the train from there, and then you took it downtown. If we're have like the future mall, that would be a great point for people outside of Goodyear to take the train to. So that would be a point where you'd want like a stop. But along the line, not including stops, I don't think you'd want residential stuff right up alongside.
I think that's a great point. So this, to me, talks a lot about at the station or within, let's say, walking distance of the station.
Yeah.
You can all think of it about as a quarter mile. But, so I think we've got that one pretty much, let's say, beaten to death. But now let's talk about along the line. So you're not at a station, you're outside, let's say, that 15 or 20-minute walk.
Yeah, I'm thinking
But
commercial.
you're on that corridor.
I would think commercial because businesses would like to have all those eyes looking at all those businesses along the route every single day. So if I was a business, I'd want to be along the line so everybody could, when they're driving by or riding the rail, they can come back later and maybe come
What
do
kind of
business at my business.
We're talking industrial, are we talking big office buildings, are we talking retail stores?
Or
Yes,
probably
yes,
mixed, but more I think more towards retail and
But I think they'd want to be within the
Specialized
walking
places.
distance corridor rather than along the path. I mean, what you'd really want is someone who can tolerate moderate to high noise levels. As
I
if
was
we're
thinking
assuming
the
this
same
train's going to be
thing.
going relatively fast, which means you might actually want industrial.
yeah.
Right.
You know,
warehouse
When you
or
ride
I mean
the
places you
Phoenix
could go.
light rail, you go past
No.
restaurants, you see some interior design places, furniture stores, you see, the basketball venue and the, baseball. You eventually get to the airport and you get to Mill Street.
Because if we're just saying one or
Going,
two for the
there
entire
are
city,
various things to see and do.
then at best
all
you'd
along
want
the way.
essentially warehousing industrial along the line, because they don't care a
Okay,
whole
so
lot.
we've got, I
If
like,
we're
I'm
talking
just
about,
gonna stick with the
every
various
tenth of
things
mile or
that
something,
can
yeah,
do.
sure.
Um, But I also have warehouses, so either one of those is acceptable pretty much to everybody?
Yep.
Light industrial.
You don't like warehousing. You're not gonna see anything.
Okay, so that's sort of the diversity part of this. Okay, now, let's go back, to the density part of this again. For the kinds of residential that we see, let's start at the station, okay, right around the station, within that 15 minutes of the station. What are we thinking about?
Condos.
Yeah, apartments.
Multi-story
Apartments,
Apartments.
townhome.
Maybe a school, college.
Hospital.
Destinations.
It's just residential
Yeah.
right now.
That's again different.
Okay, how high are these condos, apartments, and townhomes?
How tall are the ones we have now? How tall are the ones
As
we
high
have
as
now?
they want
Four or
them.
five stories?
As high as the market will bear.
Very few places in Phoenix are high, they tend to spread out rather than.
Because remember, once you leave your 15-minute circle, you might have a single-family house behind it.
Leslie, do you know, or Katie, the maximum height of buildings now in Goodyear? Per
It
location.
depends what district you're in. Most of the single-family districts are about 2 stories, 30 feet. I think our commercial is 56 feet, our general commercial, industrial.
Okay.
So that's about 50 feet, so that's 5 stories, right?
Right.
Give or take. 4 or 5 stories.
Residential, the highest we've got is like a 3-story apartment, right? There's nothing really higher than that in Goodyear, is there?
Not right now.
Yeah.
So around those stations, now, let me, again, throw something else at you. Let's say we had at a station, because we haven't really talked about if we would mix these uses, but I'm kind of listening to you, I'm thinking you're okay with that.
No,
You got
No?
stores or
No.
restaurants and then have a farm.
it doesn't work.
Well, but if it did work, would you be okay with it?
Yes.
Okay. So, if there were a mix of uses, let's say stores on the bottom, is a 3-story building what you're looking for? 5 stories, 10 stories? Give me some help.
3-story.
I think
You
3
don't-
would go higher
yeah.
than 3.
Max.
Yeah, 3.
For apartments, we're talking about
Well,
or
like
mixed
she's saying,
use?
like
Okay,
yeah,
I got
mixed
a 10
use.
and a 3.
Would a 5-story apartment or condo building next to a 2-story retail, some other story, wouldn't that do the same thing, but it's not all in the same building? Can't you have a storefront, then you have down the street, you've got a higher density residential?
You could, but if you wanted to encourage development, why
But-
wouldn't you let them build the 7 stories and stick it all in one building? and
Well,
then
because
make
you could
it
do
so much?
retail on the bottom and office on the top, but
Or
in
lofts.
in the valley, it doesn't, the residential on the top,
Isn't working yet.
it isn't working yet. So if you allow for the individual uses to be done and you increase that intensity of an area, then you can, then it could work down the road. But don't say that you want this area to have all 3 uses in it, because if you do that, nothing will be built for the foreseeable future.
So you're
Whereas if,
reacting to the Avondale City Center situation?
absolutely, it's kiss of
So
death.
give people some background on this. Avondale, when they built their city center, required, as opposed to allowed, mixed use, vertical mixed use. And they required a minimum height as well. And because of the cost of building that high and maintaining those buildings where they were tough to lease in Avondale to start out with, and then with that kind of very aggressive building format, that's a really transit-focused building format that wasn't supported by transit, many of the developers felt that it made it impossible for them to develop, given think that what I'm hearing you say is that allowing it to happen is one thing, requiring it to happen
Absolutely.
is another.
If you allow a developer to build a 4-story condo project, and then you allow another developer to build a 3-story office project, and they're adjacent to each other or in close proximity, what's going to happen around it may be exactly what you're talking about. It may be that mixed use, but if you put the emphasis on it, as Avondale made the mistake, and I think Goodyear had a mixed use designation that nobody really knew what the heck it meant and whatever, at this point in time, you've got to make accommodation to allow a really cool, interesting new project to happen without being required to have some other type of use on the bottom floor or whatever. It will happen eventually, but if you want to foster that growth, you've got to if someone's willing to go above 2 stories, you've got to let them build what the market will bear. That's not saying that the whole area, that won't happen somewhere within that area sometime down the road.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is put up here, allow mixed use to happen, but don't dictate the mix.
The question I have, the Buckeye on the Velago community, the downtown area, you do have a store in the first floor and the condo on the 2 level, but they're working.
Well, it looks like it's working, but Verado pays the retailer on the bottom to stay open there because the market won't, it doesn't make enough money, so they have to pay them to actually keep their store open. That type of thing is a burden to the city. Doesn't want to have to pay. The developer doesn't want to have to pay. You have to let the market kind of dictate. That type of development will happen all over these corridors that we talk about. But another thing to remember is, Mill Avenue 30 years ago was single-story bookstores and little bars and whatever. It was a redevelopment thing that got the whole thing to go vertical, and it was because of the university and the densities and the maturity of the neighborhood.
I think that your concern is a good one to put out here now, because if I'm understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, what we're trying to do with these land use categories is instead of being restrictive, dictating the mix, like George says, you can only build houses at 4 units to the acre in this area. What we're trying to do is say, there's a whole bunch of uses that create any given kind of place. Like if you look at this transit-oriented development stop here, you've got parks, you've got temporary retail, with probably not showing is commercial or housing that's behind some of these trees. But it is a mix of uses that's occurring within this place. And so the idea is to say, these mixes we think are great to work together, but there are other uses in a light rail corridor. But we don't think, for example, that farms are really great on a light rail corridor, because we're making a lot of investment in transportation to move people from place to place, and there's really nowhere to go on a farm. I mean, forgive me if you're a farmer, but you know what I mean? You're not moving a lot of people to and from a farm. So what you're concerned about is the design, dictating design. The general plan does not dictate design. And so that's not where we're at. So while you have in mind these kinds of places, what those actually look like, what the building skins look like, if they have windows on the ground floor, if they have nice awnings, all of that stuff, that comes through zoning. Right now, what we're just talking about is the uses, the intensity, and the density. And so, to kind of refocus us on light rail, the density we're talking about along light rail is condos, apartments, and townhomes. So we're thinking these are the places where this kind of development density goes. Taller buildings belong along light rail corridors. That's what we're saying. So if a developer came to Goodyear and wanted to, and I'm making this up, and wanted to build a 10-story building in a commercial parcel, and I'm not really good with streets, but in Palm Valley, one of those northern areas near the houses that are kind of unbuilt yet, what Goodyear would say if we went ahead with this new approach is, you know what, we want that 10-story building, we love development in Goodyear, But that's not where we want 10-story buildings. We want our 10-story buildings along our light rail corridor. So take this idea for your 10-story building, find a piece of land along that light rail corridor, and buddy build your hard one. That's the kind of plan we're trying to create these places. Does that make sense? So then when you see this 10-story building going in, you're saying, oh my gosh, it's exactly where it should be. It's next to the light rail stop. What a great project. And instead of going down to the city council and complaining, you go down to the city council and you say, what a great idea. We need a 10-story building next to our planned light rail corridor. So that's why we're trying to get us to talk about these types of places. So now there's going to be times where light rail goes through areas that are developed. Okay? Now we know that most of Goodyear, where it's developed, is fairly low intensity. Do we feel that when light rail, and I'll divide station and line, okay? I'll put line here, and this will be station. If there's a light rail station in an area that's already developed, as we know Goodyear now, what kind of development do we envision in that area?
Redevelopment.
Well, let's say it's a vacant lot in an existing commercial area, or a vacant area that's near some housing that's developed close to the freeway, or along Van Buren. What kind of development do you see? Are you okay with saying, just let's move this over? So there might be taller buildings next to shorter buildings. Or are we saying no taller than the tallest building that's in that immediate area? Or are we saying we can introduce commercial where there's residential? What would you be comfortable with?
I think you do at a station, you have a destination.
A destination at a station?
Yeah.
What else for an infill parcel? What are you guys thinking?
I think that since we're talking about 20, 25 years down the road, I'm okay with moving the density just over, under the assumption that once we say, hey, this is going to happen, then potentially just natural redesign will sort of shift them around as needed.
So it can be higher density than the surrounding area.
Under the,
Really
yes.
clear.
Simply, if for no other reason than because we're talking a much longer range, so that it's not going to be, next week someone's going to build a 10-story building. It'll be
However,
a decade from now.
However, now, this is all fair disclosure. A light rail plan gets planned, but it may take 10 or 15 years for that rail to get built. You're going to put those stations in your plan a good long time before you see that piece of infrastructure coming in. So now, I'm going to be, because George is so smart, he's going to say, hey, I'm in on the ground floor of this planning thing. I'm going to go snap up that piece of ground, and I'm going to put my 10-story building on it, because it's at a planned station. The city, based on this plan, would say, you know what, that's appropriate. We're planning to have a station here. We think there should be a 10-story building. But around it, there are still lower buildings.
Leslie, but then when do we introduce those provisions about, let's say there's an infill vacant parcel next to a school, and we don't want a 10-story building next to an elementary school? Are we introducing that here, or is that going to be more written into the land use component?
Well, I think that's a good one. I don't know.
Well, I was gonna say, I'd actually disagree with what Leslie said a little bit, because to me, that's the purpose of zoning, is to look at current conditions and what might have changed. General plan, we're up here, we're saying 10-story buildings are appropriate along the light rail, but when someone comes in for the zoning before that light rail's there, we're gonna say, all right, what's going on with the light rail plan? Do we know it's definite, it's 2 years away, they're just in the middle of building it? Or if it's really up in the air still, we may say, no, it's not appropriate to zone that piece of parcel of land at this time. And that's the purpose of the zoning, is to look at what's going on right now.
How is that going to work with SB 1598? Because is that going to be okay?
We'll tell them no. We
Okay.
just have a timeline.
Okay, gotcha.
1598 is the Senate bill, and it says we have to give people a specific timeline in which we'll tell them the answer, but that answer can't be no. So, in yours, I think there might be specific, like schools are so populous throughout the city, it's such a major thing. I think something like that, I could see us creating a goal for that in the general plan. But there might be really specific things that we just can't come up with every. And again, that's where zoning comes into it, where we look at the surrounding things we need to address, maybe not tonight, but maybe at another session like this in our land use plan, and we'll get to that.
Wouldn't schools be more in the planned communities, though? Because the schools are usually located within the communities. I mean, at least in Goodyear, they seem to be.
I think a lot of it will be, but there
If
might
it's
be, there
specific
might
school.
be infill parcels in some of our already built
Is that
areas.
trivia? That,
You know, and as you,
like that, is that
those schools are gonna be in more
archways?
urban areas.
Yeah,
The
the
bus-
Archway,
Yeah, is
the
that-
charter
Yeah,
school.
charter
The charter school is like across from like Best Buy. I think it's Archway right there. Trivium. There's stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, and that's where kind of, again, zoning comes in, because the general plan may not think the school's gonna be there, and then, oh, a charter school opens, and so then when we look at zoning, it's like, oh, well, we had no idea there'd be a school there, but there is now.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll do it.
Okay, so does anybody have any more to add to development along light rail and transit?
So based on what was just said, isn't it make sense in the station, you've drawn the line up there, as opposed to in the infill, to say that development should be compatible with existing land use that's already in existence? So that you don't have a 20-story building next to, a housing development and things like that are incompatible.
I thought Katie's saying that's sort of something that should be handled at the zoning level rather than our level, so that we would be okay
I
with
think
saying,
that's a good general plan.
we want a
policy.
high-intensity usage along this corridor, and then just until it's built, we can sort of, or until we are pretty sure that it's going to go along this street or that street, we can sort of say, no, we're still not sure it's going to go there, so maybe not.
But having that general statement, land uses need to be compatible, infill development needs to be compatible with existing, lets us then at zoning say, we don't think a school in a 10-story building in a single-family residential district is compatible. And, our zoning ordinance might have specifics of what compatible means.
Okay. And I would guess along the line, we're also gonna say compatible with existing land use. Okay, does anybody have anything else they wanna add to this? We can come back to it, but I wanna try and get us through
The next one relates a lot to this one, too.
I was gonna almost skip it. Do you have a lot of slides on it?
I have some pictures.
Let's do pictures.
And this one, and I should say, for those who gave me pictures, I assigned them categories. So you might not agree with the categories I didn't use every single picture I got, so I'm sorry. So if you think, oh, I gave her this really great picture, bring it up, because we might know the area you're talking about, or you can describe it. But David, will you tell me why you gave me this picture?
Yeah, this is Livermore, California, which is about 60 miles or so east of San Francisco, Oakland metropolitan area, and they're about the size of the size of Goodyear. And within the last 10 years, they have developed this downtown area, and it's become a magnet. And they've also put in a performing arts center and restaurants, and now it's the center of the city. And where people used to spend all their time going to San Francisco or Oakland, now they're staying in Livermore. And I think that's exactly the vision I have for Goodyear, is that we don't always have to go to Phoenix or Mesa or Tempe, that there's going to be something here. And I just really liked the aesthetic quality of the street. The parking is basically behind, so you can see restaurants, boutiques, and libraries and bookstores and so forth, and a lot of walking passageways and so forth. It's aesthetic, and it's really become the hub of this little city.
Where would you envision a place like this that you're describing?
Well,
What would be a driver
I did spend a lot of time looking at the Civic Center proposal, and it seems to me that it has a lot of these qualities in it. So if that Civic Center is going to be developed as it's in your plan, then that's the way I would envision part of it to look.
But would that go, for example, on a transit corridor? Would we see it on a major street? Would we see it near a natural resource? What would be, is it someplace that we put near an airport? What's some of the drivers that you think?
The drivers for me is that Goodyear has a center to itself. It's a 25-mile long strip that's 6 miles wide. there's no center to it whatsoever. And so it seems to me that it belongs in the
Civic Center.
Near the Civic Center, and also if you haven't looked at that plan, it's really well developed with 4 different corridors and aesthetically designed, and one features water, and one features shade, and one features air, and one features natural landscaping and so forth. So I was pleased to see that.
So maybe one of the drivers of land use that was left off this chart would be a city center, even though that's kind of in and of itself going to be a land use category.
I agree. In fact, I was going to add that.
But we'll put that. So the kind of development that we see in
Right.
the city center is similar to the.
And what makes this work for Livermore is there's so much to do there. There's restaurants, there's a performing arts center, there's a movie theater, there's several playhouses, there's bookstores, there's coffee shops, there's boutiques. There are no fast food restaurants, there are no drive-throughs, there are no I would say they're all locally owned businesses.
No McDonald's?
No McDonald's. Sorry. And a lot of good wine.
This is my 2 cents. This is your committee. This is your general plan. I specifically left city center off because there was a committee just like you guys who just talked about the city center and nothing about the city center. There's a specific area plan for the city center. There are zoning documents for the city center. It's gone through years and years of planning. And my recommendation is that we do want to think about it, talk about it. Things change. We might have suggested revisions, but there's just been a lot that's gone into that. To open that up is a major decision that you guys, if you decide to make
Well,
that.
but here's another idea.
No, I would
You're not
agree.
opening up the city center that you have, but you saw on that map, you got a lot of city.
Well, that's true.
And so maybe in the south, there might be another city center.
Sure.
And so if there were, the restaurants, performings, these kinds of things might be some of the diversity that you want. And maybe what I could fill in these other squares would be similar to the city center that we've already got.
Yeah, there could be 3 areas because one could be north of the I-10, one could be down by Australia Lake, and the other could be the city center. But I'd encourage you all to look at that document in that CD that you gave us that specifically addresses the city center.
So what are you thinking?
I just it actually makes me think of the whole mall situation. I had read about them building this mall. They're going to be building the same developer. I can't remember who's doing it. They're going to be building another one in Surprise as soon as they finish this one. I've seen stuff like that happen. And I think if you're going to be doing a city center, you don't want to do anything like a second and a third city center. You detract from the one that you actually have. Because it's going to happen. It's like I've seen it happen with malls and all kinds of things. You build one, you build a new one. The one that you just built goes downhill because everyone goes to the newer one.
Okay. So let me see if I can put both these cards up here. You don't necessarily think it's bad, I'm going to assume, to have these kinds of uses here, like the restaurants, performing.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's bad. I
But
think
you want a
the
unique
idea of
development
multiple.
format.
Yeah, I think the idea of having multiple ones is just. I don't think it would work.
But a unique development format for each. Okay.
But the city
So
center.
what that might end up in a plan, just so you know, is it could end up in another 2 stars on the map. And when it gets to that point in time, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now, the city then says, okay, we're ready to develop where the stars, let's do a specific plan for this area to make it unique. But that makes it kind of a place that people want to be.
So you're saying that the city center is off limits? We can't discuss moving it or changing it or?
I'm not saying, because like I said, it's your plan.
I'm not trying to open up a can of worms here, but.
Yes, you are.
Remember, you guys, we're gonna end up with a plan, it's gonna go to the Planning and Zoning Commission, then it goes to the city council, it has to be adopted by city council.
Right.
Only after that can it go to the citizens for ratification. My personal opinion is you won't get council adoption if you make a radical change to
was planned for 2009, and we are 2013.
Well, I mean, this, where we are right now, there's more development here than there is down there. And in the foreseeable future, there'll be more development along Van Buren. I like Avondale's idea. Force that thing to come down. Maybe that's something that we should accommodate. I mean, if you had a rail line, bus line, whatever, it was focused on Van Buren versus I-10, you get a lot more benefit from it. You got a lot more exposure to it. You get a lot more benefit from it. I'm just saying. And I'm not saying move the city center, but I'm saying that there's probably going to be a lot more development along Van Buren in the near term than there is down there.
Well, and just as why I put this on this transit on major streets, because when I saw these pictures, I was personally thinking Estrella Parkway. I think this is kind of what council wanted to see on Estrella Parkway. Right now, Estrella is designated as the city center gateway overlay, and then we want something different leading us to our city center. And I was kind of thinking, I think this is kind of what they were wanting. Lots of landscaping, buildings close to the streets, that kind of stuff.
I think one thing that I see, the first thing that I noticed looking at these pictures, aside from the buildings are not tall, there's a lot of sky, is that you don't see any street lights. And I mean, stoplights. And so that's something to think about. Is it more pedestrian friendly because you don't have these huge thoroughways where people can just kind of park and walk wherever they want?
Yes.
And so that was the first thing that stood out to me. And maybe it's just your pictures that show that, and maybe it's different in other parts of Livermore, but I think that's also an interesting thing to think about. Do you want something on Estrella, which is almost like an extension of the 10, or do you want to have more pedestrian-friendly or smaller streets?
Well, one of the things that they mentioned in the general plan too, the existing one, is village centers. And that's kind of in the future to be located kind of throughout Goodyear. And so if we're thinking future, we're thinking the population is going to get much bigger. Something like that picture in those village centers, not to any big extent, but maybe kind of a modified version of a city center, might be very accessible to people where they can walk to it or bike to it and access all those amenities that they want. So that's more, I guess, futuristic, because I don't know when those village centers or what the concept is behind them.
Darren had this picture. I wanted to just get on to the next one. This is in Phoenix, Roosevelt Road.
Yeah.
Tell us why you sent me this picture.
A lot of this I think was talked about in the previous slides. It's it's a mixed-use type of development. As you can see, this location is probably about 3-4 blocks from light rail, so it's you can walk to the light rail station from here. And as you can see, it incorporates Warwick Transit. Very walkable, with the sidewalks being set back from the street. Storefronts are right up front, and then you also have the businesses down below with the residential up above. So I think it has really good characteristics, and I was also thinking of the city center area, but maybe not necessarily right within it, but just on the outlying areas near the library. If we get the universities down that location as well, students, residential or students living there. So yeah, I thought this was a good picture.
But one of the things that you mentioned was the buildings up to the curb. And we're sort of still kind of talking about this major transit corridor, kind of village center, light rail transit at the station idea. Is buildings built up to the curb something that you do envision? Anybody not envisioning that? You're not? Okay, help me out, Lou.
Well,
What do you envision?
I want a people-friendly corridor. I don't want an old city look like back east. Look at that setback, trees, little median strip. That's nice, clean.
So you're, okay, I'm probably speaking badly. When I say buildings up to the curb, I'm talking about buildings built up to the back of sidewalk. Not built up to this curb. So that's my bad. So is that sort of what people are also envisioning for this kind of a corridor? Yes? Anybody not envisioning that? So if we looked at higher, but overall, this is sort of what we're seeing. That would be a pretty good guide for Katie.
Yep.
Could
Any
there be any
concerns?
parks at any point interspersed every, I don't know, little open space that's,
Okay.
you know,
It matters how major it is.
Consideration.
If it's on a
Yeah, I've got
freeway, I
parks
wouldn't want
written
to
here.
necessarily
No.
live on a freeway, but I'd want to be a little farther
Yeah,
farther back.
We have community
Residential
plazas
wise.
written in here.
Well, I think they're talking more
That
about
would work?
the
Does
Estrella,
that work, community plazas?
Van Buren, those sort of.
Public parks, gardens, art. Okay.
Primary streets, not so
To
much
me, it sounds like
I-10.
you want it walkable, so if you can walk to it, instead of walking, and I'm thinking of just the average shopping center, you're walking across the whole parking lot. If you get out of the bus, you gotta walk, 30 aisles of parking just to get to the store versus this. And
Right.
these transit areas need to be more walkable, where the buildings are closer to those hubs, whether it be a bus stop or light rail or whatever it is. And then there's parking on the backside, so people that are driving to the grocery store or whatever can still get to these areas.
Does that give you enough, Katie, you think? Okay, so let's go to the next group of drivers, which would be natural resources, yeah? Is that the next one?
Yeah, I think I have mine, and in my presentation, I have residential development next. I guess I
Okay.
didn't,
So high-density residential
yeah, I
development?
wasn't,
Okay.
sorry. So the reason this is, included, one, single-family residential development typically comes first, so we have a lot of that in the city. I think over the next 10 years, we are gonna see more high-density residential developments. That's one reason I wanna talk about it. Two, it was brought up at the last meeting, one of the concerns of this land use plan change is, how do we protect these single-family residential developments from higher density developments, which might not be compatible land uses? Whereas right now, our land use plan says, density is, higher density is here, lower density is there. But if we kind of wash that out in these policies, rather than colors on a map, how do we make sure that land uses are located appropriately within comparison to one another? So here's some of the pictures. I just put Roosevelt Row back to this one too, so Garen, I don't know if there's anything you want to add with terms of high-density residential development, but
No, I think, if you put this in the high-density residential, the key is it's also mixed use. You have the businesses on the ground floor. And one thing I didn't bring up on the slide before is you notice there's not a lot of on-street parking. Not a lot of businesses support that, but these businesses here rely on the people riding the bus, the pedestrian traffic, the people living above the businesses. So that's something to consider.
something I'm personally noticed about it is they face the street rather than being some of the typical suburban apartment complexes we have today, where, you build a fence and then you put these buildings and have open space and it's all kind of insular. This is facing the street and facing out. That's something I personally noticed about this picture.
I just have a question. Actually, George might be able to answer this. I don't know, since you seem to kind of be knowledgeable about this. I know Westgate has a lot of the mixed usage. Do you know if it's been successful up there?
No.
Is it really just not working out really anywhere right now?
Well, 3/4 of the whole Westgate project has gone back to the lenders, and there's been, so has it worked the way it was supposed to? The answer is no. And let me just add, the reason people say is it was a little before its time. You needed more intensity, more density, and then that will work. So, eventually, whatever we do here, 30, 40 years from now, Goodyear's going to have this type of use. I think the key for us is to let it take the baby steps that are required to get us there and not stifle development or new ideas or cool ideas from coming here. Give people the ability to look at this plan and say, well, can I try this? And give the staff and everybody else the ability to say, well, yeah, we can try that. Maybe it's something that's different, it's out of the box. But, so anyway.
So is this level of height and building intensity something that people could live with in Goodyear?
It matters where.
That created, okay,
Yeah.
Help me out. Tell me where you would have problems with it,
I
or
mean,
where you wouldn't.
this type of concept here would have to be near a lot of commercial, a lot of things you want to do on the street. I mean, if it's out in the middle of a field, I mean, I wouldn't. It wouldn't look very. I mean, it'd be more of the insular type thing where everything's kind of inside.
So more along,
It just matters what's around it.
so more along the arterial roads then?
Yeah, this would have to be somewhere where the area could support it. I mean, where there's stuff to do, to look out the window and places to go, as opposed to far off.
We have this right now, Leslie, don't we, at right on Estrella Parkway, right in front of the apartments?
Yeah, Estrella and Yuma there, right? Isn't it just
They have at least one single office space right there at that area right now, is that?
Yeah, it's all empty.
We all know what he's talking about.
South of the post office, north of the ballpark.
There's
It's a mixed use
kind of
just like that.
suburban
Yeah.
apartment complex, but in front of it, there's mixed-use buildings.
All the ones that face behind there are the bottom are all supposed to be businesses, but there's nothing there yet.
It's a great
So
looking
weird, I would
project.
think like a bar would
Yeah.
do well with all this, but
It's a great.
A little restaurant.
But here's this is another one. This picture's from Penn Eagles. I threw it here in a high-density residential development. You may not have meant it there, but what did you see about this picture? You might go off from residential.
Well, it could fit there. I'm always impressed by Goodyear residents who yearn for a cohesive city and not little enclaves spread all over the place. Like one of the gentlemen up there said, a 3-mile wide, 25-mile strip. So this was representative of a city center, much like Darren had previously and the like. But as you might envision, let your imagination go, residential people would then back up this central area and make it a very vibrant area, whether the college was there or an art center in your city plan, so it's all integrated, if you will. So that's why I put it there.
So you're saying you envision that just behind this, there probably are a lot of high-density residential developments, and maybe
Yes.
there's a buffer between the commercial corridors and the lower-density single-family.
Yes.
That there's like this.
Keeps going. An onion.
Now, Dave told me about a plan from Vancouver, Washington, and I pulled a couple of pictures from inside this plan. This one that just showed some different types of housing, but tell us why you told me about this plan.
Well, the city put together a sub-area plan for a residential neighborhood, which entailed commercial, high-density residential, and scaled all the way down to low-density residential. And what they did, or what they were trying to do, was put a new development together, because this was all instigated by the state of Washington, putting a new on-off ramp there, and so they wanted to create I guess like for what you mentioned, a separate district or commercial area with residential development around there. And so it started out with office buildings, commercial, just retail, shopping centers, and then it went into high-density residential, which was about 24 units per acre. That was the maximum density, all the way down to about 4 or 5 units per acre. And so there was just a varied amount of types of residential choices that you could make. If you wanted to live in apartments, you'd live in a certain area. There was also I don't know if it's shown in there, but there was a area for senior housing as well too. And so that was another part of diversity, which is what I thought you were mentioning about. But diversity can come in different forms. So I sent this to Katie, thinking that this might be something that, if you're talking about, a master plan or a sub-area plan, that like this could work somewhere around here. But these are the type of the housings that we were talking about. They could be either apartments or condos, senior housing types as well too. So just.
So let me maybe take this and push it. So maybe you're envisioning high-density residential development, and maybe it isn't this diversity as part of a larger mixed instead of mixed uses?
Yeah.
Okay, does anyone have any comments on that? I'm seeing a nod, but anybody have any, do they like these ideas of these garden apartments set out, or when we see residential that's higher density, do we want it as part of a larger set of uses?
I think it's,
They are
the
there.
city has, what, 20 units per acre? Is that the maximum density? On
Their zoning
the zoning ordinance, right?
Right, some of this is
Something like
gonna
that.
be probably a little higher though.
Yeah. Yeah, these are
Yeah.
24. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one last picture, and this is another one that Deb gave me. She might be surprised or not surprised that I put this with high density residential. But,
No, I think
again, do you want to talk about what it is, what you think?
Well, you can see it's a community garden, and it's in Tempe, and it's actually located, I believe, near it's owned by the city. It's adjacent to a community service center and an elementary school, and so you've got a lot of different audiences right there. I really think that something like this would really fit in any area, but especially in high density, maybe because people are there, and if you have a lot of people there, that can bring a lot of social cohesion. And it's also allowing people to grow their own, fruits, vegetables, and also aesthetically pleasing if you do other things. So encourages physical activity as well, and people getting to know each other, possibly crime prevention too. If you have something like that, people get to know their neighbors and look out for one another.
I don't get along with my neighbors.
So,
That's right.
that's the last one? Yeah, that's it. So if we're gonna talk about that, one of the things that sort of goes to in the development, but maybe high density residential, I mean, you put it in there maybe because that's an opportunity that could come with it. Maybe these ideas of creating places, which sort of goes with this idea of as a part of, I guess what I'm asking is, do you want these seasonal apartments that we have, these garden apartments, or do you, if you're gonna have higher density, do we want it connected to other uses?
Connected to other uses.
Connected part of larger uses. So, for example, this could be a really kind of sea change for Goodyear, is to say, garden apartment complexes aren't really how we want to do multifamily development. We want to do it as part of a larger development. We want to do it as part of development that's either part of light rail or transit or that's located downtown. But if you're going to take 80 acres and just say, okay, we're going to zone it multifamily and build a garden apartment complex and stick it in a, at a corner of two major streets in a single-family neighborhood, that's not what we're looking for. Do we have a place for those kinds of things, or do we have places where we want to do different types of apartments? And I'm asking, I'm asking.
Yeah, wouldn't that, I tend to agree with George, that will be up to the developer proposal, and as the marketing demand comes around, or whatever the developer wants to do, so we give them flexibility, so.
But I think on the other hand, this is an important kind of shift in where we want our identity to be. Do we just want to allow developers to build, huge apartments on 80 acres, or do we say, yeah, you can take 75 of it, but 5 of it has to be something else too, so that it's more of a integrated living space instead of just, residential.
The problem with requiring multiple uses on a larger parcel is it all isn't going to be built at the same time. And so you're going to have to allow one use to come before the other. On a 40-acre parcel, there may be 5 acres that are apartments, 10 acres that are single-family detached, 2 acres that are commercial, and the balance is going to be office and some other types of uses. But all those components are going to happen at different times, and you need to allow that flexibility to say, this type of use is allowed in here as long as it meets these certain criterias. I mean, you're not.
Let me ask the question differently, because I did a bad job. Where do we think garden apartments go? Okay, tell me what a transition area is.
Probably between high density and low density.
No, or between commercial,
Or commercial.
and residential,
Yeah,
or industrial,
low
residential.
density
or-
residential, yeah. I think it'd be important to get diversity with.
Go ahead.
I agree with Dave, but the picture that I see is when you go to Scottsdale and you go to a place like the Gainey Ranch. Now, I understand that you said, it's not all built at the same time. But, some people have actually talked about, down at the airport, if we had another resort down there, people coming in that are just coming in here for, that have that kind of a lifestyle, or people that like that kind of a lifestyle at the Gainey Ranch. You've got a hotel, you've got condos, you've got office buildings, and people can, they're close to the airport. It's almost, it's like an urban kind of a setting but being out here, in the country, and that's what I see in a community like that.
So that, you're talking more than about multifamily as part of high density residential, as part of a larger
Yeah.
development.
Yes.
Okay. Any other thoughts about?
I have a question that I feel like I need answered because I'm seeing that infill box, isn't it? So my question would be, what would you be okay with if there's a vacant parcel very close to the house you live in right now? You live in a single-family home. What are you okay with developing there? And especially, does 20 units per acre mean something to you? Would you say, no, I don't want anything over 10 units per acre? Or maybe, are there certain building types where it could work? Maybe these building types, or maybe the one in the middle, which are townhomes. Maybe that building type, yeah, that I could see next to my house. The one on the right, that's getting a little too much. It's too tall. It's too dense. Think of it that way. What
Could you have attached houses?
I think, to me, I living over in historic Goodyear. I think if you have a vacant lot and you're talking close to an already existing neighborhood, if you're speaking just strictly with the residential, like what would you put in that vacant lot? I think on the lower end of the spectrum, like a low end, high density apartment thing. So nothing. I would think nothing that would go multiple stories, just a single stories, but maybe detached homes. I think Park Shadows. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's more of it's apartments, but they're almost older homes really. But they're all single story. They're more packed in, but they're all within the same region. So it's not. It's not really a full on neighborhood, and it's not really an apartment complex like that. It's a little tighter than a regular neighborhood would be. And I would think something like that.
Could other people live with that?
I think Deb's idea of community gardens or parks, if it's just a small area in a residential, that I think would be good.
for the higher density?
Yeah.
Instead of higher density, you're
Oh,
saying?
instead of high density, yes.
Or to buffer?
To buffer, I guess.
I'd say it matters where it is. I mean, you wouldn't want commercial. You wouldn't want
Street
full on
corner.
industrial.
I
But I
want
wouldn't mind
community
like a little
gardens.
shopping center or something like that, a light shopping center to all the way to these
A gas station.
like duplexes or things like that.
And I think it's also, quality of life we have to think about. You can have, higher density, but you also want to have that quality there. So softening that scene a little bit with what you're saying might make sense, especially in an infill area where you're just trying to use that space and make something, good be there.
It matters with the size
I think
of the
quality
space.
is really
the location.
important.
Yeah. Quality and location. I mean, is it a street corner or is it something else?
Yeah, in the middle of the neighborhood, or
Yeah.
is it?
Right.
Because if it's
So,
the middle,
okay, no, you're having a good discussion.
Well-
Middle of the neighborhood is different than the street corner.
Yeah, I think-
So,
Streetcar is expected, I think, to have somewhat
More
light
commercial.
commercial to maybe apartments to.
a multifamily needs access to
Yeah.
street corners. It should be out, like, on the edges.
middle, you're expecting more like schools or parks or, I don't know.
And I think thinking about
Stuff like
people
that.
who would actually live in that multi-housing area, you know, what type of income would they have? What type of access would they have to transportation? I mean, do you want to make things convenient for them? That's what you might want to put in that infill area as well.
But that's when you get into those village pods, you know, and so that with every so many types of different housing, whether it's multi-use or anything, then you have to have, you know, stores, parks, should be accessible to walk, to ride your bike, you know, that kind of environment. And like Deb says, it brings that cement city down to a roar, and it's a softer, it's a aesthetically pleasing kind of community.
Okay, so what we've sort of got for high-density residential is it's a little bit, what I'm sort of hearing is, one, it should be where there are lots of things on the street. It should be near commercial. The more heightened building intensity, the more it needs to have access to things like transit and services. So when we're dealing with high-density residential development, the more of it, the more it needs to be located to services or transit and more access. Places that we'd like to see density or where we think density is appropriate is between commercial quarters and residential single-family or as part of a larger development. The kinds of diversity that we're thinking, we kind of said, you know, garden apartments maybe, things that are mixed use should be transit dependent and facing the street. And in terms of infill, depending on where it's located, depending on the design, we live with single-story attached or duplexes, but that a middle of a neighborhood really needs to be looked at differently than a corner. And I think that gives you enough to write some little policies for those kinds of corners. Okay.
Something else, something new to high density residential, and even in the current development code, I don't think there's much discussion about senior housing.
Okay, I'm gonna put that under diversity.
You're a senior, aren't we? I am.
Speak for yourself.
And actually, if I might, could I put that in the light rail transport? too? I have to tell you guys, this is pretty impressive. I've done, I don't know how many general plans, and I've never seen a group work like this, and I'm really coming up with land use. It's really pretty impressive. So
I'm sorry, I have a.
you should start patting yourselves on your back. Go ahead.
You had mentioned like kind of soft commercial or soft retail. Was that at part of high density also? 'Cause I mean, I think like there's a ton of empty lots in my neighborhood, and I would love if there were like a coffee shop or a convenience store, like a local grocer or something. And so that's what I think of with like soft retail. But is that something that was already in there, or am I?
Nope, we're gonna
Okay.
add it in. Corner store.
Can I
It's really
just
near your
say
neighborhood, you
something
don't
that
want to
Deb
run
addresses
somewhere
all the
through
time?
every night or-
There's a new
Well, if it's a
general
corner
store.
it's probably going to be
Deb, have you
restocked
been to
if
the
you're
new
not-
general store up on,
And that's probably
I think
gonna
it's
be the-
Glendale, and it's out in the middle of nowhere. And what they've done, and I think this would be such a cute idea, they've taken an old-fashioned cowboy general store, and they've, you know, they've got fresh fruits and vegetables. They have all that kind of stuff. But it's really, it's heading over towards Waddell, and I think it's Glendale.
Glendale and Cotton, right?
Is that what it-
you're
yeah.
thinking? Are you thinking of the general store, or are you thinking the old farmer's market?
No, the general store.
The general store, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's Glendale and
It's a
Cotton.
cute concept.
It's like a California.
Okay, what's your next topic?
Development your natural resources. I put this in here because, especially at the visioning session, there was a lot of talk about all our natural resources and how much we can use that for economic development. But of course, we have the Bullard Wash, Steel River, Estrella, Sonora Desert National Monument. I was just talking with someone that the Dianza Trail goes through Sonoran Valley area. We have a lot of natural resources other communities just do not have. So we want to think about how do we use them, and then how do we be sensitive to them.
I'm an advocate of, I find parks and open spaces to be very conducive to psychological well-being and the sense of community, people coming together, people-friendly areas. And so this is from Milwaukee when we were up there this past summer, and you can see that it's a nice park and areas for congregation, socializing, and partying.
So let me turn this picture around a little bit, Ted. I'm noticing, because we're talking about the development near the resource. And this is a great picture of a resource, but I'm noticing behind the resource some rather intense development. So are we comfortable with intense development like that? Now let's think of our resources, which would be the mountains. And I actually don't think it's a bad idea to put more people near the resource, or around parks.
Well,
So where are we looking at maybe more intense development around? What kind of resources?
Well, are you talking about here in Goodyear? Well, if you have to take each one separately, I think you can't generalize. And certainly Tres Rios and the Gila has its own unique characteristics, and I'm not sure that any high-rise building near the river would go over too well or be very compatible. There'd have to be a certain distance, zoning, perhaps, as Katie mentioned, a process, so that there'd be some restrictions, it would seem. I'm not sure how the rest of the committee feels, but there might be other areas that I'm not touching on, but that might support this, because notice those high-rise buildings are quite a ways away. They're not just right next door. This is a big park, so let's realize what we've got here. It's not right next to the river, so to say. So we'd have to use some discretion and some planning and some constraints. So the process that Katie and the development people and the zoning people would adhere to would not allow those types of buildings or anything would be incompatible to destroy the ambiance, the character, and the nature of the natural beauty of whatever the situation was, right?
Okay, so let's go to the Gila, all right? And the Weston Resort wants to build a resort along, well, let's just say near the Sonoran Preserve, okay? I'll throw this out to the committee. And part of that resort project could include a 10-story building.
Well, it'd have to.
Development that we feel a resort development, because it would have all those other amenities, it'd be spaced out, it'd be ritzy, it's the Westin. Would we allow a resort, or would we allow Holiday Inn Resort Suites to build a tall building around a resource? I'm not saying the whole resource would be rigged by it, but would we allow a tall building near a resource? Even the river.
I see Ben saying
No, I think when you have a natural resource, I mean, everyone here has kind of talked about preservation and everything. I think it's one of those things I just
What
can't.
goes next to it? We're gonna
Yeah,
figure
I
out
know.
what
No, that's what I'm saying is when you talk preservation and you build right up next to a resource, I think that's kind of the opposite of preservation. I think it's kind of pointless if you're going to say one thing and then do another. You're kind of doubling back on yourself. I think with the Estrellas, you talk about doing the Bullard Wash. If you want to turn that into something where people can ride bikes through, walk through, hike, relax, and then you've got buildings like right along the side of it, it totally takes away from what you're trying to accomplish with it. I think the smart thing would be to avoid trying to build up right next to them.
Absolutely.
I think there could be a buffer, and there could be some. I'm kind of a mix of what he's saying. I think we need to reserve it, but I think if they're far enough back and there's enough space where you can play and do things, that there could be some taller buildings to a degree.
Okay.
I think you could accommodate. I think you could easily accommodate taller buildings. And you think of Indian Bend Wash, where there are certain nodes which would allow high traffic as well as density. You also think about, and you're talking about the Gila right now, you've got Cotton Lane, which is the future 303 that's going to go through there, as well as MC 85. That's a major junction where there's going to be a highway running right through there. That's going to be an area that's going to be intensity anyway. You've got the Gila that's going to run right underneath it. That's a place that could be a true corridor for a large building or some sort of a major.
Let me try to rephrase. Okay, this is really good. I'm going to step away from this one because we're going to have to come back to it. Let me try and go at it a different way, right? We have resources like the Gila and like the Sonoran Preserve and the Estrella Mountains, right? And I'll use an example of another project. I'm working on another project in Phoenix, and the reason, and that project is surrounded by mountains, but no one can access those mountains because there are developments that ring the mountains and there's no public access to them. So in terms of development around a resource, we feel that there needs to be public access through developments. Is that one of the, let's say, conditions that we would require? So regardless of the density, there always needs to be public access.
Sure, yes.
Because we want to enjoy our natural
Yeah,
resources.
I mean, so, yeah.
Now maybe, okay, what are other conditions that we think need to be part of any development? Forget the height, forget the density that's around a resource. What does that development have to do? How does it have to respect that resource?
Low light pollution?
Okay, that's a good one.
Or the environmental.
Does anybody have any problems with that?
Dark sky.
Well, what other kinds of things or aspects of that?
I want to see non-Euclidean
Probably to
zoning.
piggyback on that, like low noise also.
Okay,
Yeah, it's like nothing, you wouldn't want industrial stuff right
Right.
next to it.
okay.
Or or I guess I'm thinking of like probably a bad idea, but like the Coliseum. I know they try to reroute like some of the Coliseum in Rome, like the traffic, because it was deteriorating some of the structures. I don't
Yeah,
know
so
if
they
some
would
of our
probably-
resources
okay.
would really be
So,
affected
like
at all.
noise,
So.
low, so
Not like
what
a-
about vehicular, or so
Yeah,
are you
low
saying maybe
s-
low
yeah.
vehicular traffic? Is that
Mhm.
what I'm hearing you
Yes.
say?
Yeah, if it's, because it's on a preserve, I mean. But also for air quality too. Is that what you said to begin with? Air quality?
Yeah.
Okay,
Quality.
I lost that one somehow.
That's okay.
Sounds like
You
Simon
say
said,
quality.
pedestrian friendly, so whatever goes in there, make sure they accommodate pedestrian friendliness throughout.
So,
You have preservation of natural features.
nope, that's a good one. Okay, so it needs to preserve the natural features of the site. What about things like, are you also talking about views?
Yes.
For who? Huh?
My question is for who?
I don't
For
know.
the, what's being developed or
Good
for the
point.
people who live behind that thing?
People behind that.
Behind.
So preserve views of the resource.
Exactly.
Well,
Well, then you
So you
would have any
can,
tall
instead of
buildings.
having.
Right?
But our problem is that a lot of the people behind it are all single to double-story buildings, and if we want to encourage 6 or 7-story buildings, that may not work.
Right?
Yes.
Okay,
Like
so,
Jackson Lake
just so,
Road.
right, so I'm very clear about this, so we could have it all low, or maybe you could have a lot of development in one thin building that leaves a large window. Okay, I'm sort of seeing some ads on that.
I think part of it depends. Like some of like what he's saying, what Tony was saying about the different. If they're already industrialized areas, then they need to have the opportunities to build, not to destroy, preserve yet still build up, to use it as a design. And some of those can be draws. I mean, if you have a decent hotel that also they have the view of the resource, but doesn't destroy it or is smart about it.
Okay, so now, let's, I'm gonna kind of begin to, let's go to the river, okay? Because the river is a hard thing to preserve views of. You build a 2-story building, we've lost the view of the river. Right?
Unless you have a Tempe Town Lake type thing. I mean, I don't know how. I mean, it's still a resource. And it's still important.
So do we not like what's going on in Tenby Town Lake? That's not kind of good here.
I'm just saying it's a,
Okay.
it's an
That's good. Am
idea of what's
I think it's
No
two
on
different.
that?
I think it's two different things.
Yeah.
It's honestly two different things. Like a lake to a river is two different things. I mean, again, it kind of goes back to the idea of the light rail. I mean, what you were saying about the kind of nodes. When you're talking about a river or a wash, it's a long, narrow thing, and so you can have points where you have like a major road going across it. Yeah, you could maybe build up there, but are we talking that, or are we talking like we want to line the entire river with
businesses and homes and everything else. I mean, it's two different things. Tempe Town Lake, you've got one side that's got, a freeway on it. You got another side that's got some building on it, and you've got a couple of bridges. So it's different than a river because it's just a round body.
Okay, so you just helped, that was perfect. So you just, okay, along a river or a wash, okay? Again, I'm asking comments. We can have, what I'm hearing is higher development at major crossings or major points along a river or a wash. Yes?
Yes.
Some places. Okay, so that'll begin to help you form up that category, right? You're gonna get another shot at this, so. Now, when we talk about a node, just so you know, we're all kind of connected. We could include all this kind of stuff, right? We're good on that, but it's a node.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I
we'll
have some
talk
more
in
pictures.
pictures.
Maybe I can show some more pictures.
Go for it.
A very different type of natural resource.
Yes.
San Antonio.
Let me.
Is this yours?
Jose,
I-
why did you want this?
Yeah, that's why I was looking at Ben here to see. But it depends. It depends. It depends on the densities and the buffer areas.
San Antonio, this is Pueblos, Colorado.
This is Pueblo, Colorado, with all the walkways, with orchestras and concerts happen. And I sent it out. Is saying because I saw the mall that is coming up, and the Bullard Wash that has about 80 acres of available land, almost to provide flexibility to the developer how they can do that if they desire so. But it is a walking or a man-made river walk because we don't have too much water in Arizona, guys. But the reclamation facility, the water reclamation facility is there by the Bullard Wash. So if we are talking about a man-made creation allowing a destination point for people to go and have diversity and during the weekends or during the winter or during the summertime. It will allow flexibility for the developer, and I agree with what Ben was saying before. If you want a natural resource conservation, you cannot have it both. But at the same time, we are talking about a tremendous magnitude of land available here in Arizona that with constraints, I think Ted was talking about specific constraints that the zoning department and others can group together and put those strings to it. And we can give just the flexibility out there, that is doable. So these are just examples, but some of the other items were discussed before about density. And like Tony was saying also, he was thinking that in the example of Ted, he was thinking that it's doable to have a building with certain distances from the buffer or the river, man-made river walk in my example. But that's all it's another
So
example.
I could almost see that along Bullard Wash.
Yeah, that's what I put it for that wash, the Boulder
So
Wash.
what I'm gonna do is say river walk destination.
Yeah,
Now, we're gonna have a difference here with Ben.
I honestly, looking at that, I like the idea. I'm saying it goes back to the light rail thing. Are we talking like doing this kind of thing the whole length of what we're dealing with, or is it just a section? Because I can see something like that on a section of, like the Gila River, or the section in the Bullard Wash. It's just when you do that, and then what's going to happen after that? Is it going to then go back into the natural habitat for a while, or are we just going to keep developing the whole length of it?
Okay, well, let's do that. So let's kind of push that a little bit. While we think these nodes and places are okay along our resources, do we predominantly want to maintain the natural character of them? So would that be another kind of policy for development in those areas, that predominantly the natural character is maintained, but in some areas, nodes, which we may identify on the plan or they come later, we think that there's a development's appropriate?
You can say minimum disturbance or.
I think that's exactly it. As you say, this type of development is only allowed at nodes, and those nodes maybe are identified.
And one note, and you may have to say man-made river walk, because a river walk, I guess, we have creeks or dry creeks and dry rivers here. We don't have a river, no. I haven't seen one.
This is man-made, like Tempe Town Lake. I mean, almost. I mean, but it's only for like a little bit.
Exactly.
I mean, that's like a
Yeah.
mile or less, I imagine.
Yes, it's constrained. Remember, for your background, this began at the end of the 1950s and 1960s, and it was only within 1 square block in San Antonio. And look at what it is today after 50 years. So somebody say, let the baby grow, as the market and demand calls.
I have a question that kind of
Concept.
that kind of takes over from this, but when I think about like the Estrellas and this, nobody yell at me yet. It's just a thought. Is there room? Because I think about South Mountain, I think about Central Park, I think about the Tiergarten in Berlin, where there are restaurants in the actual parks and in that are strictly there to make money. Like, so is there a place for that in the Estrellas or in the preserves, so that people don't just go and look, but can sit and enjoy and eat or drink or
Desert Museum.
The destinations within the resource that are appropriate.
I think the Desert Museum's a
As
perfect
appropriate,
example of
that
It's
blend into the
appropriate,
resource, that serve light,
Sedona has some mountains.
Yeah, like the library outside of White
Yeah,
Tanks.
so the library up at the White Tanks is
Sedona's already
a good example. To me, of a small building is a good example because it actually they designed it. The architects designed it to very much kind of fit in with the environment as much as possible. I mean, it's building in a natural environment, but then he even was bringing up the Desert Museum down in Tucson. That's actually another. It's actually a park that's integrated into the natural environment itself.
I mean, the Desert
But there's
Botanical Gardens
restaurants
too.
and there's meeting rooms and gift shops and.
And it becomes educational also.
Yeah.
And
It
cultural.
enhances the resource.
Yeah.
I think also one thing to think about specifically with the Riverwalk, Scottsdale has Scottsdale Waterfront. They've actually took their RID canal for the Arizona State Park. They took that and turned it actually into a canal and actually a pedestrian-friendly area. You're taking a nasty-smelling canal and you're actually doing something with it.
Yeah.
The shops, and that's exactly
That's
what
what
this
the-
Pueblo
yeah.
project is. And we have the RID canal runs right through Goodyear, isn't it? The RID canal that does that. And we've got a couple of different spots where we just have Pebble Creek that backs up to it on one side, Palm Valley backs up to it on the other, and then it winds its way through. And then you've got some commercial, and one building of commercial backs up to it, and then there's the shops at Pebble Creek that actually face the canal, but they just stare out to a gray concrete canal and empty vacant. And then on the other side, I think, is the West Core. I think it's multi-density
And the
residential.
mall is going to be nearby there too.
And so there's tons of opportunity to do something like this in that area. I think even south of there where the park is, the Palm Valley Park on the other side of Estrella
I'm
Parkway.
sort of thinking, I'm hearing a location for our natural resource, no land use category right there.
I think even
It might be. It's a great opportunity where you hear the Bullard Wash is not going to have any water in it, but you could create some sort of a project like this if you wanted.
That canal you were mentioning is there.
Okay, I'm gonna push this because we're at 8:30, so I'm gonna try and push this on a little bit. We're getting there. We go to employment quarters and centers.
Okay. So, obviously we've been hearing a lot about jobs in our discussions, but I specifically put employment corridors and centers on here because one, it's a land use, and two, I've been hearing a lot from council. And I'll just throw it out there, one of council's ideas is to turn Bullard into kind of our own Price Road corridor. You know what I'm talking about when I mention Price Road in Chandler? That's where
like a
Intel is.
technology hub. Yeah.
Right now we have this industrial land use category, and it's kind of, in my own opinion, almost an outdated category. Industrial category we made in the 1950s when we did a lot more manufacturing. Now we see a lot of distribution centers. And so, is there a place in Goodyear where it makes sense to maybe limit distribution and focus tall building, do you just wanna, I mean, you know what we've been talking about, or just
About 8 stories, it looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, that board area, there's really, the residential's pushed far off. Where that area is looking at. The other side of the wash was residential is, and then everything else is commercial the other side too. And the airport's south and north is more, is the cancer treatment centers. So I like it there, personally.
Okay, so let's just say if it was on the Bullard corridor, okay? What kind of height or building intensity would we envision? I mean, as tall as that, that's, I'm figuring it's 7 or 8.
Well, the Bullard corridor is 2.5 miles long from I-10 to Estrella.
No, it's the opposite.
Yeah, from I-10 down to like the ballpark
To the
area.
ballpark.
Right.
It's only about 2 miles,
The
yeah.
airport's kinda right there, so.
2.5 miles.
Just so we all
So,
are kinda, you can look at your maps and.
right, but you're talking about
Couldn't figure it out.
1,000 acres, maybe 1,500 total acres. Could you look at the corridor differently, closer to the freeway? Maybe more would accommodate this type of use, farther away from the freeway, traditional.
So taller, closer to the freeway?
I'm just throwing that out there.
No, is that-
It's such a large area that if you, I can understand right on Bullard, maybe 300 or 400 feet deep. You want to see more smaller type office type uses, but if you designate the whole corridor as this office, that'll never happen. It's too much land. So if you want to start creating these little designations, then you've got to look at the whole area and say, okay, where would more intensity be better in this part or less, or as you get away from Bullard, maybe the intensity
So what are people
decreases?
thinking? Is that an idea? Maybe the taller building is closer to the freeway?
And yes, and an example is the Palm Valley Hospital.
Absolutely.
It's
Cancer
from-
hospital.
The cancer hospital, right. From the I-10, you can see it on there, and that's a multi-story building. It's not like a corporate like that, but it is.
The taller ones have to be near the freeway because the airport's
Maybe
south,
20
and you
years
can't make
ago
it
in
too tall
Kansas
south.
City, they
Yeah,
started
near the
doing-
airport.
Yeah, 'cause there's a
height restriction there.
Some on the highway that are big like this. And then they have a thing they called corporate woods that took a huge thing. And you'd drive around and there were lots of different corporate buildings. And it was like the place to have your headquarters in Kansas City 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, in Denver, south of Denver, they've got the Denver Tech Center, and that's where these types of buildings exist. And just exactly what was said a moment ago, you are on a campus with buildings, but it doesn't seem like this is overbearing at all because they're so nicely placed. And you drive around with trees and grass and everything.
Got the wash right there. They can go.
And you got the buffer stuff, and there's such a large area in this Bullard area and it's close to the airport, and that's good for business potentially anyway. So it fits.
Something like that, I think, would work well along the, whatever light rail line or transit system. I mean, there's got to be something that people can go to work to and from work conveniently. And if the light rail comes down Van Buren, you can get all the way down there. So I don't know how many, if you bike or walk, how far it is between that and I-10.
Yeah, but a business like that did have a shuttle, but that is a thought about
Yeah.
the light rail.
I mean, they're talking about employment before.
Right.
So,
Need to be like a bike stop or something,
Yeah.
a bus stop
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah.
Just like downtown Phoenix, they have off Central there. There's quite a few.
right.
Okay, so what I'm hearing on height and building intensity is the taller building closer to the freeway.
Yep.
Transportation infrastructure to the north. As we move south, less tall.
And I mean, you have to do that with the airport anyway, I would imagine.
Yeah. They'll limit somehow.
With the height restrictions for planes.
So now let's move to density. I heard some discussion of a campus setting. So what I'm hearing is what you'd like, and you can envision these taller buildings if they are in a campus setting. If they're not in a campus setting, is that acceptable?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think so.
I think with this, trying to get businesses, like larger businesses, to come in, I'm going to go back to kind of what George was saying earlier about the kind of leave it open, because I think what you're going to run into if you try and tell people, oh, we want a lot of this, you're requiring a very big, massive company to come in and build a very large building. And what are the odds that you're going to get? You know, if you say we want X amount of space filled with these, what are the odds that you're going to get that filled? Whereas if you leave it open for, because you can get some like medium-sized buildings, I would think that you can, like on the campus level, that you could get filled in with a lot of fairly large companies that can come in. So I think it's smart to leave it open that, hey, this is what we want. We'd like to see these, but then still leave it open for someone else to come in.
So what I'm hearing is
They
kind of
support each other.
flexible development programs along Bullard.
The thing to keep in mind is, with all that thousands of acres, you're just because you allow a smaller use, single thing, not a campus type use, doesn't mean you're not going to get that next door. Doesn't mean that that's not going to happen. I mean, the market's going to dictate it. And if you say that you want that type of development, but you're not exclusively focusing that has to go here. I mean, there are other places that it could go. It could go at the 303 and the I-10. It could go at Perryville Road. There's going to be an interchange there in I-10. There's a lot of different places that those intensities of uses could go.
Yeah.
I just want to ask a specific question to make sure everyone's okay with it, because I didn't hear discussion about it, but not just about what we include, but one of the ideas is, and just so we all know what a distribution center is, Macy's, Dick's Sporting Goods, Amazon.com, very low employment. There are not very many employees at these places. It's basically a warehouse. Trucks, a lot of truck traffic, wherever you go, there's going to be truck traffic on the nearby roads getting to the interstates. Are there some areas where those are more appropriate than other areas? And specifically, is the Bullard corridor, knowing that this is the general plan, some of those spaces do have zoning and entitled right to build a distribution center tomorrow if they want to. But our future plan, what we wish the city could be, is the Bullard Road corridor. We're kind of talking about a place where, kind of like the example before, a distribution center wants to come in on Bullard Road and we say, we'd love to have you in the city. We have Palm Valley 303 along the 303. We have NC 85, and those are the perfect places for you to locate. And Bullard Avenue is something different. We want that to be very dense with employees.
So no
Yeah, the
warehouse.
corporate office is
I'm-
there and the others.
You're dictating
Again,
a 500,000 square foot distribution building looks exactly the same as a 500,000 square foot manufacturing building. The difference is one has more employees versus the other, but you can't make the statement that traffic isn't going to be relatively the same. You're going to have goods coming in and out. You're going to have employees coming in and out. So you can't, it's not all one way or
But
the
I
other.
think what Katie's saying is that what she's asking is, do you want, as a community, the Bullard Road corridor to be more of a office employment destination? And do you want
Or commercial
manufacturing
trucking.
and warehouse?
There's too much land for it to be just an office
Well, you know what
employment.
though, I think, what you're saying is, you're right. Central Avenue, there's too much land for it to just be an office corridor, but over 50 years, it is developing with some office, some higher density residential. So I think it's a development type. And so I think to say, what we're kind of saying is warehouses and manufacturing typically aren't set in settings similar to this. They're similarly set in more of a utilitarian setting. They typically have
Perfect
parking that's not in garages. They typically have more truck traffic than does an office building. So you need to have more loading facilities and storage facilities. So for those kinds of developments, are those the kinds of developments that you feel are appropriate on Bullard Road, mixed in with office developments and other developments, or are those the kind of developments that you feel are more appropriate at the 303 at Mountain Lake? That's the question that we're asking.
Let's let us get a little perspective. This type of development looks to me like Washington and 44th Street. Is everybody familiar with that? There's a transit. The transit line is there. There's these types of buildings. Okay, I think it would be appropriate for us to see, and I will do this at our next meeting. I will show you how much land all these 12 or 15 beautiful buildings are actually sitting on and what surrounds them. And then I think you can get an idea as to what you're actually trying to do here. Yeah.
Public Works, the truth of the matter is that if you add up, you could say that about any area in Phoenix, in Goodyear, or in the Valley. And we're not, I think that what you might be, I'm thinking your concern is that people expect that to be developed tomorrow. And I don't know that that's the expectation, but I do know that if, for example, you're trying to create an area that is like that 44th Street and Washington Quarter, where they don't permit warehousing and they don't permit industrial, and they're sitting on that vacant land because they know that they want to keep options open for things like hotels associated with the airport and higher-end retail. The Bullard Road Quarter might be a place where, as a community, you say, there's a place we want to keep open for high-end employment, high-end housing in the future, maybe hotels, that's highly transit accessible. And we know that if we permit warehousing and manufacturing in that area, it's going to make it difficult for it to turn into that kind of a place.
My point is within a mile or two of that Washington and 44th Street, there's warehousing, manufacturing, all those types of uses.
It's not at 44th Street and Washington.
It's not right at the intersection.
That's exactly right. And so on Bullard Quarter, I agree with you. On Bullard Quarter, we're asking, what kind of place do you want that to be? We're not talking about a mile from it.
What about a quarter mile from Bullard?
Well, let's go there after we figure out the quarter, okay?
Well,
I think we just have a disagreement that we're just gonna have to step away from.
just go ahead alone.
We have two different opinions.
Well, I guess also the question is, I guess, how long are we considering the Bullard Quarter? He's implying possibly something from like I-10 to Van Buren or I-10 to Yuma versus all the way down to I-10 to the end of or all the way down to the end of Bullard. Right.
But I do think it's important to realize that we're talking about creating places. And that is the discussion that we're having, is what kind of place. And the size of the place matters, you're right. But do we want a place where we just say, you can put a warehouse next to an office building that's kind of a high-end office building next to a manufacturing plant? Or do we want to say, no, there's an area where we want to have high-end office buildings, and we don't want to have warehouses and manufacturing, and we know there's going to be a lot of vacant land there for a while. We don't expect it to fill up. And that's the question that you do have to ask yourselves, and it is a tough question, and I think that you guys need to discuss it. And I think that you're going to have to come up with a land use description for the Bullard Road Quarter, so this is sort of, a tough one, but let's talk about it. So, what are you guys thinking?
Well, I'm thinking about the word employment. Are we focused on getting people employed and keeping the people in Goodyear and the surrounding area in Goodyear to work? Because I remember that being a fact in the beginning, is that most of us leave Goodyear to work. So, I mean, I think that's what should drive it, is what is going to bring the most number of jobs for people to stay in Goodyear to work. And the other thing is, what type of businesses are we trying to attract in Goodyear? And that might answer part of the question. Are we looking for more warehouse type businesses, or are we looking for those big headquarters? Are we specifically trying to get certain businesses here? And what do they want? What do those businesses want? Where do they want to be located? Have we asked those kind of questions?
Well, the people that, that just put in Dick's, do they have their corporate offices there? Where are their corporate offices? Could we make it really attractive for them to have their corporate offices here, since they have a big warehouse here?
So do we want to say that we want a place in Goodyear where we want corporate offices and high-end employment, and we also want places in Goodyear where we can have other kinds of employment that may not be corporate offices and may not be high-end? Can we just say that? Forget location.
one thing we have to get in touch with reality, and the reality is that a corporate office will not be placed anywhere near a warehouse or any kind of industrial complex like that. Look at Scottsdale Road, all those nice high-end offices, whether they're corporate or not. The corporate people want to be in an upscale area because they can have good client relations, they can have nice hotels, they can have conferences in those hotels. It's an upscale area. We don't have anything like that. We don't have any corporate offices as a result. We have to develop that kind of an atmosphere and ambiance if we want to get these kinds of businesses attracted to our place. It doesn't mean that warehouses aren't desirable, but they are in an area over by Indian School and 303, as you mentioned before. So, and there are other areas where corporate people could locate. The new 310, 303 and I-10 intersection might be an advantageous place also. But anyway, the corporate people want to come to an area that is conducive to their kinds of clientele, and their employees too, by the way.
I think it's will be an extension of what's already going to happen with the regional center. So even though I-10 crosses, splits the development, it's just a Bullard goes underneath and just becomes a continuation.
Okay, I'm going to try and do this differently, because I think I'm going to take Bullard out of the conversation. And when Katie comes back with the map, she'll have those places located, and then we can have that. What I'm going to ask you is, what I'm hearing, and tell me if I'm hearing it wrong, is that I'm generally hearing consensus that there are different types of employment places. There are some places that are more warehousing, manufacturing oriented, and there's some places that are more office oriented, corporate headquarters oriented. Is there agreement there?
Yes.
Okay. So for employment centers, what I'm going to say is there are two kinds of places, and you're going to have to. We'll have this discussion again, I can assure you. Because what he's going to do for land use categories is then create those two kinds of places and locate them, and then we'll go at it again. Okay?
The question will come is, do you want that type of development now, or do you want it to go somewhere else? Is it better to have a 500,000 square foot distribution center here in Goodyear, or are you okay with it going to Buckeye?
Well, you know what? I think that having been through this discussion with other communities, I think what the communities do when that discussion is weighed is they say the cost of that development. So if the cost of that 500,000 square foot warehouse is losing a corporate quarter, there have been communities that said, go away. Scottsdale's one of them. We're going to wait for a corporate project. We'll help you find places, other places in the community. We'll give you incentives for that project, other places in the community, but you're not putting it there. There have been other communities that have said, you know what? We don't care. We're going to throw the plan out the window. The corporate center is more important. And they've gone about maybe finding another location for what they had originally envisioned or giving up on that vision. So I think that choice is going to be good here is when the plan comes around. And that's sort of where the council needs to make the decision.
But because of all of that you said, the word that is missed here is flexibility. In negotiation, we cannot dictate any location as a specific corridor without allowing the flexibility of opportunity somewhere else. Nothing else. That's a no.
Okay.
It should be there.
That's a good point. We need to provide places for everyone.
Just a question, how do we go about attracting businesses to the area? I mean, is that a city council function, or is that Chamber of Commerce function?
I have to tell you, you guys are probably one of the most expert jurisdictions at doing that, and that's economic development. And they market it. They talk about city incentives. They'll talk about amenities in the area. They go to trade shows. They reach out all the time. They work with the Greater Phoenix Economic Council. They work with Westmark. There's a story about Mesa. You know how Mesa got, I think it was 18 businesses downtown what they did was they researched the kinds of businesses they wanted. They sent out something like 1,800 letters. They got about 100 responses, and they got 18 new developments. And that's how they started their downtown recently. So there's different ways to do it. But yes, it's you need to be proactive, but you need to identify where you're going to target.
So do we know what type of businesses want to come here then, from their research?
Right.
We want to make them come here.
We're gonna have an economic development presentation. We're gonna have a day where we talk about economic development. Our economic development staff is gonna come here. I'm gonna talk to them about who else they think should talk to your group, whether it be the Southwest Valley Chamber of Commerce or the Greater Phoenix Economic Council. And if, you know, George, you have someone who you think is kind of the other side of the fence. We wanna hear all sides of the story. And they can talk to us about it. And, you know, there's gonna be, that's kind of why we're doing the land use plan first and talking about this, because then we're gonna revisit it again and again. So we may come up with this idea, and then when we talk about economic development, say, oh, we screwed that one up. We're revising that on the land use
Yeah,
plan.
I mean, it might be Bullard Road Quarter is like the best spot in the world for warehouses and manufacturing. And office buildings only want to be in city centers. So that's, if you have an office building, we're going to say, you know what, don't put it on the Bullard Road Quarter. Put it in the city center. So, you know, that's sort of where planning is. I mean, that's why this does become so important, is because it does direct the land use. When people look for parcels to buy, they look for parcels where they can put the development they want to build. So this is the very, very first step. I'm going to push us along if I
Yeah.
can.
And you know what, I think, you know, we were gonna talk about airport development, but I think we might wanna skip over this, because it's the same issue. When we talk about economic development, we're gonna have the airport come and talk to us about their plans, constraints, all those things. So, I had just done some aerials of some of the different airports, so I think because of the time, that would be a discussion best for economic development. The other thing we wanted to talk about was kind of the master plan communities idea. Currently, our general plan encourages master plan communities. If you do an amendment to our general plan, if you're what we call PAD, planned area development zoning, you get much higher acreage to be able to change before you need to do a general plan amendment than if you're straight with zoning. The general plan and zoning really does kind of push our developers to doing these planned area developments. So, you know, one question is, do we still want to do that? And, you know, we want to talk about master plan communities, and again, we might not come up with all the answers tonight, but then also, if we do, what do we want to encourage in master plan communities to address in the general plan? And I came up with these pictures, I think, and this is just Verrado, just because we all know Verrado. And, you know, George said it, one of the great things about Verrado is that they built this main street, but the developer did it as a master plan community. They built that center, it wasn't demanded. They built it, they also built a school before it would have been built, so that there was a school there from day one. And that can be one of the benefits of a master plan community. This is another one, Stapleton, Colorado, which Leslie gave me the idea. And it's similar to Verrado. I pulled that, you can see that big open space with all the high density around it. And again, you can see the houses start looking, you know, front porches are a theme in a lot of these master plan communities. But also remember, Pebble Creek is a master plan community, Palm Valley, Canyon Trails, all those are master plan communities, and you kind of know what those look like.
Can I throw some ideas, though, just for you to think about? We're not asking you to plan the master plan community, but to think about what should be in it. But what's cool about Stapleton is it was on an old airport. And one of the things they did is it's a very sustainable community. It's a walkable community. It's sustainable. One of the things they did is they pulled up the runway and they reground all that runway and used it as pavement in the community. So it was built sustainably. So those are just to throw out ideas of, you know, what do we want out of our master plan communities? Do we want them to be built sustainably? Do we want them to include open space and parks or schools, as Katie said? Or should they include downtowns and community centers? Should they be connected to the communities around them? So those are the kinds of attributes I think that we're looking for.
And another kind of process question, this is another picture of Stapleton, and I put this in because you can see how, you know, they have this corridor and there's higher density residential right next to it. And you can kind of see this graduated density concept. But there's single family homes But I think that's part of the thing is, when you do a master plan community, it's much easier to plan these things because you're planning it all out at once. And you know what it's gonna look like, and you plan for how the single family and these multi-families will integrate. And that's sometimes why we push master plan communities, because it's a way for the developers and the city to look at how a whole community will develop, and you have this master plan to guide the development. And so you know that certain uses are gonna work together because they've been thought out that way, rather than that single family development that has this vacant piece that nobody thought what to do with, and then we slap a multifamily piece on it. That might not work as well when it was thought to be multifamily all along. And that's kind of the benefit of master planning too, is that say single family next to apartments, and we're, but it can work when you plan it out. And then I just wanted to throw in a little reminder that we did have a Verrado type community plan once upon a time in Goodyear, and this is a picture of Amaranth, and it was gonna be lovely and wonderful, and that then 2007 happened, 2008 and further, and now it's many years in the future, but that's just one type of master plan community. I mean, I don't mean to call you out, but Tyke's in the audience from Newland Communities, developer of Estrella, and I think they're doing lots of cool, exciting things. Worked on Canyon Trails, and I think that's a good development. I mean, there's lots of benefits to master plan communities.
So are there any particular attributes that we would want to throw out for master plan communities? Because I think we're all kind of burning out right now.
I think the most important thing is connecting to other communities and connecting to retail and connecting to commercial.
Trails.
Go to the transit.
Some open space.
Or at the very least, well-designed water retention basins. Because most of those are essentially required open space already. And so as long as they're properly designed, that should fill most of that.
Greening.
Katie and Leslie, how do you? It's easier to plan a larger area than a smaller area, but how can we make accommodation for the 5 or 10 acre parcel that isn't part of a master plan? I mean, how do we incorporate that into the whole planning? While the master plan is being planned, all the properties on its periphery are obviously. I think that's something we need to, if we're going to talk about, what we're going to do with these master plan communities, is what are we going to do with these other little parcels?
I think
Infill development, right?
this is probably a misnomer, in a funny way, because I think a master plan community will sit within a larger land use category that gives you some flexibility and options for those parcels. So, for example, if a master plan community, there was a parcel within a vacant, let's say a commercial corridor or an employment corridor, you would have this kind of range of things you could do with that, or there could be a campus that's sort of a the same for a master plan community if it was in, I don't know what you're going to call your land use categories, but for example, I'll just use what happened in Casa Grande. A category called neighborhoods. Master plan categories fit into those neighborhoods, but neighborhoods included small-scale retail, apartments at a certain level of density.
Right.
So those are what could happen on those single parcels, all those kinds of things. As Katie said, zoning, and there are rules on how it can happen. As Katie said, zoning is sort of when those site uses get chosen, but there's still that selection of uses within that land use category. So those parcels could pick those up. So what I would think that would happen is a master plan community that wanted to also have in it a huge industrial park, taking something up, again, probably wouldn't be appropriate in the Goodyear, in the Casa Grande neighborhood category. And so what they would say is that master plan community as planned isn't going to work in this location. Does that make sense in your brain? Yeah.
Do we have master plan community requirements now, Katie, or parameters that people have to design to right now?
Yep, in
Can you relate those to us as a basis on which to get our minds around this issue, or do we not know that?
Everyone's different.
My thing is this is the first time I've ever lived in a master planned community, because I lived down one of those 5-acre places out in the country in Kansas. But anyhow, we really have liked it when we came to Goodyear and got to looking, and I live in one of the Palm Valley areas. To be able to see that in the Palm Valley areas, and whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whichever, you go into the community and there are various levels of housing, sizes of houses. I don't know why you couldn't have one of the 1 to 5 acre communities as part of one of the masters myself, unless that's just not in their parameters, because we thought that was really neat, because it just integrates things together, that there are people of different economic levels live in the same master community, and that helps with the diversity, and you get to meet people. So, I mean,
Doesn't Trilogy do that?
I don't like it.
Okay, so what I'm gonna pull out of what you just said, and maybe sort of drawing this down because I think you guys are dying, is integrated lifestyles. Do people feel that that should be an important component of a master plan community?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll stick that under diversity. Okay, I'm gonna let you off the hook. But before I do, I just wanna tell you something. What you did tonight was phenomenal. And you don't appreciate it because you don't do this for a living. I do. And I need to tell you how phenomenal this has been for me to hear a community really talk about how they want to see development. And I think when you see this come back to you, you'll be really impressed with the ideas that you had. So I, for one, I would sit here with class, that's kind of lame, but I want to give you a just because you did such a great job. So what's going to happen now is Katie's going to take them and develop new land categories that are going to describe the kinds of places that are going to be good here. And she'll put them on a map. You can leave what you place in place. And that map is going to come back to you. And you're going to begin to, what's going to happen to the dialogue in the future is you're going to say, I kind of like this community in this location, but we need to fix how we describe it. I kind of like this place in this location, so I'm not happy with the description. Or you might say, I love the description of this kind of place, but you put it in the wrong spot on the map, so let's move it. So does that make sense to you? So it's going to kind of come both ways. But we can't, it's going to, you'll see when it comes, but we're getting there. So it's a very big step, and your next step out of this will be to see a map with land use categories.
Will this information then be presented to the rest of the residents in those meetings in February, so they get that and they can provide input?
Yeah.
Because, we're 25 people and it's what we think is best, but we need to know what more people think
And
about
yes,
it.
thank you for bringing that up. So the idea would be that this map that Kate puts together does go out to the community, and they'll react in those same two ways. Boy, this is a nice description of the place, but, let's say we have a category neighborhood, I'm again making it up. They might say, my neighborhood needs to include zoos. Why are zoos listed in neighborhoods, Or they might say, why are apartments listed in warehousing districts, because people should be able to walk to work. So Katie might adjust the categories. Or maybe Katie pull up Bullard Road again, the Bullard Road or warehouse corridor, people go, oh, no, we want that to be our Scottsdale Road. So she'll take the high-end employment designation, whatever she's going to call that, and maybe move it to Bullard Road, and she'll adjust the map a little.
The other important thing that's going to happen between now and then is every quarter our department has what we call a development advisory forum, and it's a meeting we hold during the day, and we just meet with the development community, let them know code changes, process changes, just so they know what's going on, they can tell us their concerns. And I'm going to be talking to them about this. I've already started a little bit, but as we create the land use plan, I am going to be meeting with major property owners to talk to them, because they're a major player and they can halt this if they highly object. So we need to get them involved. So also at our March meeting, when we talk about the land use plan again, don't be surprised if you see a lot more bodies in this audience, and we're probably going to want to think about how we allow them to comment
So we're definitely going to revisit all the master plan community section
yeah,
and
all
the
this gets
airport
revisited.
development.
We know we're kind of
We really didn't
short-term
finish the
anyway.
last 2 years, so I'm
All
just,
this gets revisited, and at least twice, maybe 3
Yeah.
or 4 times. It'll get revisited through the transportation, it'll get revisited through every element, this gets revisited.
Yeah, we're gonna do it in March, and that's when we're gonna put it in the plan. And in a way, we're gonna set it aside and then talk about these elements and learn about how these elements affect the land use plan. Then towards the end of the process, we're gonna kind of bring it out again and talk about how do we need to revise the land use plan based on how we created the general plan. And then it starts doing the formal public process, and then we're gonna be getting lots of comments from property owners at that time, you know, please put my piece of property to this, you know, and
But hopefully we won't. I mean, hopefully that this
yeah,
approach will
maybe
be
it won't.
different.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, since
hopefully
we're
we
not
won't.
doing specific categories, it might change. But, I guess that's it. But yeah, the discussion isn't done. We're gonna keep talking.
So again, congratulations.
Going on, I'll just go on to the next agenda item. Just the only, I mean, there's general plan communication, but just to go to staff communication, just a reminder, our next meeting's Tuesday, February 12th. At that meeting, we're gonna be discussing the transportation and the parks. You have your homework in your agenda packets that I left for you. That's your reading assignment. And then just another reminder, there's a flyer in your packet, open house meetings, February 26th, 27th, 28th. I have a stack of flyers back there. They're kind of impact to 20. Then you happen to be going to anything where you can distribute flyers, grab them, you'll have your magnets. If you need a lot of flyers or something, let me know. I can print lots. I'll also bring stacks to the February meeting. But let's get the word out about those open house meetings. It's such an easy way for residents to learn about this and get involved. They're just open house style and free. So that's all I have.
Katie, just one question. Are you changing the website or not? Is that still in discussion?
That's still in the process.
Okay.
It's just.
So
the
we're still
pyramid and
promoting
everything.
what we have right
Well,
now?
the URL for that, I'm gonna have a link.
Okay.
When you go to that URL, it's
It'll
still
link
gonna
you back
work
to
for
the
you.
new one when
Yeah.
it becomes a possibility.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting? All right, any a second?
Second.
All right, meeting adjourned.
You get this magazine new, right?
Yes.
oh, apparently the last one had several